Chapter 1418. Next, the great Confucian picked a few topics that were not so boring and allowed the young scholars to express their opinions. They talked about the emperor's establishment of the 6 pavilions, the order for 12 painting masters to paint the portraits of the meritorious officials of the spring and autumn period, and their views on the emperor allowing the portraits to be placed in the temple of meritorious officials and the imperial ancestral temple. Most importantly, the great Confucian smiled and asked the scholars to guess whether the old Prince Liang would be among the portraits. If so, who would be the painter? Would it be He Lu, who had the reputation of family of He, family of Lu, family of wealth? Or would it be little Yuqi, who was famous for his paintings of Buddha, ghosts, and deities, especially the Thousand Hands Eye Exorcism wall? Or would it be Xianxia, who had recently presented his poems and paintings to the emperor himself? There was a lot of discussion in the library, and it was very lively. Su Fengnian was a little emotional. After Zhao Zhuan set a trap for the 10,000 Yu cavalry in Jibei, and then demonstrated his power in the northwest at the Ministry of War, he quickly combined strength with gentleness. There was a rumor outside the palace that the emperor wanted to lose out on Su Zhao's posthumous title, and wanted to posthumously promote General Su Xiao. As for this loss, of course, it was caused by the then Grand Secretary, Zhang Jiulu, and his new emperor, Zhao Zhuan, and his new dynasty were trying their best to remedy it. If this was the work of the head of the Secretariat, Su Fengnian would not be surprised. But if it was Zhao Zhuan's idea, then it was very worrying. Su Fengnian was not worried about the narrow-minded emperor of Liang. On the contrary, the more Zhao Zhuan did not care about trifles, the more dangerous Beiliang's situation would be. Zhao Zhuan harbored great enmity toward Beiliang, or perhaps towards Su Fengnian. The matter of Jibei and the transport of water had already been made clear. The more Zhao Zhuan gave Su Xiao, the more he would demand from Su Fengnian. What he gave was fake, and what he wanted was real. But in the eyes of the Liang court, this kind of choice was very reasonable. Su Fengnian was lost in thought, and then he was suddenly disturbed by a quarrel. It turned out that the 7 or 8 foreign scholars and local scholars who were in opposing camps had suddenly begun to quarrel. They were arguing about when Beimeng would take Xiaoguang City and how stable Huda City was. Neither side had any objections to the fall of Xiaoguang City under the assault of more than 200,000 Yuzhou soldiers. However, the local scholars of Beiliang felt that they could at least hold on for another 10 to 15 months. The foreign scholars, on the other hand, had learned from the example of Crouching Bao and Luanhe, believed that Xiaoguang City could be taken in the near future. As for Hutu City, which was known as the most majestic town in the northwest, the quarrel was even more intense. The former felt that if they could hold on for a month, they would have succeeded, while the latter almost blindly believed that Hutu City could become the second pillar of the Central Plains, Xiangfan City, the pillar of Beimeng's cavalry. During this period of time, there was a clear confrontation. Both sides argued that Su Fengnian had personally appeared at the mouth of the gourd and crippled Beimeng's supply line. They quarreled until their faces turned red. The foreign scholars believed that the son of a rich family should not sit under the awning. They said that Su Fengnian's childish act of risking his life was because he wanted to be a hero whose name would go down in history. It was a childish attitude that caused mischief. Not only could he not be praised, if he were the emperor, he would be impeached and punished. After all, the Beiliang scholars were a little clumsy with words. Many of their rebuttals were not able to express their ideas. The scholars who went to Liang were well-read and could always come up with a chain of sages' principles to mock and ridicule. In the end, the Beiliang scholars who lost the quarrel were indeed natives of Beiliang. They almost rolled up their sleeves and used their fists to reason with those bastards who just stood there and talked. In the end, a scholar from the Shangyin Palace glared at them and scolded them as barbarians who added fuel to the fire. This completely messed up the situation. For a moment, fists and saliva flew around Su Fengnian. It was very lively. The Beiliang scholars originally thought that they would not be at an advantage in the quarrel because they were tall and strong, so they would not be at a disadvantage. They did not expect that the 2 foreign scholars had practiced martial arts and were proficient in both the pen and the sword. Su Fengyan, who had been sitting on the ground all this time and had been implicated, raised his hand to block the sole of one of his shoes and gently pushed it away. Very quickly, he had to turn his head to avoid someone's spit and then support a scholar who had been beaten until he staggered backward. The Bailiang generals who had climbed the mountain to study and left their swords in bamboo baskets were angered when they heard a little about it. They practically jumped over the heads of many scholars and entered the battlefield, turning the disadvantageous situation around in an instant. The great scholar who had once been in charge of lecturing in the Xianxia palace but was fond of military studies did not feel that it was a disgrace to the refined. Not only did he not harshly berate them, he even smiled and stroked his beard. He sat on the ground and commented on the martial arts of both sides. The foreign scholars who dared to come to Bailiang would not have the courage and insight if they did not have a bit of courage. Therefore, the fight became more and more intense. Very quickly, blood was spilled. Even so, no one retreated. First, the generals who had come because of the Bailiang's reputation entered the battlefield as reinforcements. Their actions quickly resonated with all the Bailiang scholars in the library. They all got up and ran wildly toward the battlefield behind the library. Soon after, there were also foreign scholars who gathered together as fellow countrymen from the various daos and provinces of Liang to help out. The great scholar was still not in a hurry. He watched as the number of scholars who were sitting decreased. Many scholars with small arms and thin legs also got up and rushed over. Even if they did not fight, they would still encourage others to join in the fight. Su Fengyan helped the locals a few times, but he had a sense of propriety. He only helped them block a few moves that were too heavy. He also secretly pulled back a few steps when one of the generals kicked him viciously in the groin. In the end, the battle behind the library came to an end. The gongs sounded and the soldiers retreated. Both sides confronted each other aggressively and stared at each other, ready to start the next big battle at any time. Su Fengyan, of course, stood on the side of the local scholars. Beside him, there was a dandy from a general family in Yuzhou who had blood seeping out of the corner of his mouth. He grimaced in pain and turned his head to Su Fengyan, who had blocked a fist for him. He said with a smile, "Brother, thanks for just now. When we go down a mountain, I'll treat you to a drink with girls. I've long disliked this bunch of bastards. All right, I'm Yang Huaiji from Shilu County. When you get to the county, say my name, and I'll guarantee that you'll be safe. Of course, don't do anything like killing and robbing. Even I don't dare to do such things." Cave Master Huang Shang heard the news and rushed over. He ran into the library and shouted angrily, "The academy is a place for scholars to cultivate and live in peace. What are you doing? If you have the strength to fight, go join the army at the Bailiang border." Huang Shang didn't look at the two groups of people who were clearly divided. He sighed softly to the calm Confucian lecturer and said, "Xueji, you don't even control them a little." The Confucian scholar called Xueji smiled and casually pointed at a calligraphy painting hanging on the wall behind him. "We scholars are not afraid of being unreasonable, but we are afraid of not being reasonable. It's better to be calm and to fight. It's better than holding it in and waiting to be dealt with in the future. Revenge is never too late for a gentleman." Many years later, when those with high positions in the officialdom teach those with low positions, those with low positions bully those who aren't officials, and those who aren't officials can only bully the common people. Wouldn't that be too scary? It's better for everyone to finish fighting today and vent their anger. Then we can sit down and continue talking. "Cave Master, I'm waiting for them to calm down after they can't fight anymore. Then I'll enlighten them a little. These half-baked people in the library usually sway a lot. If they don't suffer, they won't remember anything." Huang Shang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said helplessly, "Old Xue Yu." Huang Shang suddenly saw a figure out of the corner of his eye. His heart immediately shook. Right now, the officialdom of Bailiang was waiting to see a good show from the various academies. Huang Shang absolutely supported the scholars' discussion of politics. However, he was worried that the academies on the mountain were interfering with the military affairs at the border and causing the people below the mountain to be unsettled. Although the king of Bailiang had promised him and the officialdom not to interfere with the academy's affairs, he had also said that the academy would not be punished for their words. He had even protected the scholars from the disaster of war and the humiliation of martial artists. However, Huangshang still didn't quite believe that the young and impetuous king of Bailiang would really be a hands-off shopkeeper. Moreover, it was the academy that had caused trouble first. Therefore, when the Green Deer Cave Master saw Su Fengyan appear on the battlefield, he immediately felt a chill run down his spine. Was Su Fengyan going to make things difficult for him? The seeds of learning in Bailiang hadn't even taken root yet, and he was going to give up halfway? Huangshang was indeed a stubborn person. The colder his heart, the more unwilling he was to back down. He took a few steps forward and asked Su Fengyan directly, "Has the king of Bailiang come here to denounce us? Is he going to close the academy? Is he going to forbid the scholars of Bailiang from studying?" Su Fengyan shook his head and looked at the words. He said calmly, "I originally just wanted to take a look and then leave. However, I'm much more at ease now. The words on the wall are, 'Important matters of 1,000 years require the most consideration.'" Su Fengyan looked around and said with a smile, "I hope that all of you scholars will think about it carefully. Only after you have thought about it will you speak louder. You and I will encourage each other." Su Fengyan faced the great scholar and bowed slightly with his hands clasped in front of him. This principle was taught by teacher. Su Fengyan has learned from your teachings. Xueji should have hurriedly stood up to return the greeting, but for some reason, at that moment, this old Confucian scholar who had been depressed in Shangyin Academy forcibly placed his buttocks back onto the prayer mat, straightened his back, and silently accepted the greeting. Long after the young king of Bailiang and cave master Huangshang left the library, Xueji still didn't move. The old man finally lowered his head and reached out to touch the ground outside the praying mat. "Who said that the soil of Bailiang can only produce horses and armor, but not scholars?" Xueji faced a group of young scholars who still hadn't recovered from their shock. He raised his hand and pressed down, his expression full of high spirits. "All of you sit down. I, Xueji, will finally talk about how to think. This is the kind of thinking that scholars of my generation should have." Chapter 1419. The mountainhead of Green Deer Cave Academy. Huangchang saw Su Fengyan off alone. On the way down the mountain, the two of them did not speak much. Huangchang was exhausted because his momentum had been exhausted by the first spurt of energy. Since the young king of Qingliang did not come to the foothills of Green Deer Cave Academy to settle accounts with his students, then Huangchang did not have a target to shoot at. After all, he could not give Su Fengyan an inch and ask for a foot by asking for more positions in the local government offices. Mount Qingliang was already very generous in allowing scholars to hold important positions in various provinces, counties, and counties. Even if Huangchang's face was even thicker, he could not open his mouth. The more silent Su Fengyan was, the more nervous Huangchang became. When they were near the foot of the mountain, the old man sighed and smiled bitterly. "Your Highness, your knife is always on this old man's neck, but you don't cut it off or take it away. This old man feels uncomfortable. How about you give me a quick answer? If you really can't, then I'll say it from the bottom of my heart. Let someone else be the headmaster of the Green Deer Cave. The academy is like a field of crops. It's hard to get some good seedlings. If your Highness thinks I'm not taking care of it well, then let someone else be obedient. Don't take out your anger on those seedlings." Su Fengyan didn't stop. He said slowly, "Teacher, you worry too much. There's nothing wrong with the scholars of the academy discussing the military and politics of Bailiang. There's nothing wrong with the more you debate, the more confused you become." Huangchang nodded, as if relieved of a heavy burden. Su Fengyan continued, "But as headmasters and teachers, you have to take advantage of the situation and not look on coldly. I'm not asking you to speak good words for the Bailiang Frontier Army, because that's meaningless. I hope that the scholars who have taken root in Bailiang understand one thing. The reason they can point out the country is because there are people dying on the front lines every day. It's those dead people and the Bailiang Frontier Army who are about to die in battle that make Bailiang's territory not have a wisp of smoke. No matter whether they won or lost on the battlefield, they were not wrong at all. Of course, it's not a problem to scold me, Mount Qingliang, or the Beiliang Protectorate for not properly dispatching troops or for making a mistake in their plans. However, if you have the intention of watching the fire burn across the river and rejoicing in other people's misfortune, Beiliang has always politely declined such a scholar. You can go back to wherever you came from. Mount Qingliang can still afford this little bit of traveling expenses. Huangshan's expression became serious again. Su Fengyin glanced at the old man and smiled indifferently. You always feel that there's something wrong with other people. You always think that if I don't help the people, who can I do it? Reading books is to cultivate righteousness, not to cultivate arrogance and viciousness. I myself am a person who has been through this. All day long, I complain about the heavens and accuse others. When I look around, all I see is injustice. The depression in my heart is even more difficult to suppress. Perhaps you've never experienced such a thing in your life, which is why I made a special trip to Green Deer Cave Academy to say a few words. Huangshan was half believing and half doubtful. You really only said a few words? Su Fengyin smiled. With regards to the scholars of the academy discussing military affairs at the border, it's better to let things flow. I will have the government gift the various academies a few sets of the essentials of military supplies written by Chen Jibao. Why don't you let a great scholar familiar with military affairs take the lead in explaining it? First, understand the history of coal knives, guns, crossbows, and horse policy in Beiliang, and understand how we manage the army in Beiliang. Only then can you talk about the important matters at the border. Huangshan sighed emotionally. What a good, it's better to let things flow than to let things flow. Huangshan hesitated for a moment before adding, Your Highness has handled this matter beautifully. Huangshan was famous for being stingy with words of praise. This kind of bootlicking was truly difficult to speak of. It could be seen that Su Fengyin's visit to the academy had indeed made the old man very satisfied. Su Fengyin laughed self-deprecatingly. Technical work as a reward. Huangshan, who no longer held any grudges in his heart, spoke more freely. I only know how to study. I dare say that in less than 5 years, Liang will have a whole new level of respect for Beiliang's literature and classics. Before Su Fengyin mounted his horse and left, he said to Huangshan, On the eve of the Qingming festival, please bring the scholars of the academy to the Steel Forest on Mount Qingliang. There will be a libation ceremony there. Huangshan was stunned for a moment before replying in a low voice, as it should be. Leaving Green Deer Cave Academy, the three of them galloped on. Lu Yinchang asked, Master, are we going to the Beiliang Protectorate or to Huda's city, which is currently at war? Su Fengyin said unhappily, Go back to the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry. Don't worry about anything else. Yu Dilong shouted, Master, I want to go to Huda's city to kill the barbarians. Su Fengyin was silent for a moment before suddenly saying, Dilong, go to Liuzhou with Yinchang. Go to Qingcang City and secretly protect Yangguangdou and Qinshiliang. If a war really breaks out, you can do as you see fit. I allow you to make your own decisions. At a fork in the road, Lu Yinchang was pleasantly surprised. He rubbed his hands and said, Master, then we'll have to split up now. Su Fengyin nodded and did not forget to remind him, Yinchang, when you're on the battlefield, keep an eye on your senior brother. Don't let him kill until he's blinded by madness. In short, none of you should die in Liuzhou. Your real battlefield is the Jianghu in the future. Yu Dilong grinned and said, Master, after I've paid off the big guy's debt, I'll be rewarded. Master, don't forget to reward me. I still have to send it to Annie Pei. She needs a lot of money to build the courtyard house. We can't let Annie Pei borrow money from outsiders, right? Su Fengyin laughed and scolded. You're already siding with outsiders at such a young age? All right. If that day really comes, the Beiliang Frontier Army won't forget to give you a copper coin. Lu Yinchang laughed and said, A married daughter is like spilled water. Yu Dilong raised his fist and said anxiously, Or are you calling a girl? Are you itching for a beating? Do you want me to help you beat it? Su Fengyin stopped his horse at the fork in the road. He smiled as he looked at the backs of the two horses chasing each other. Suddenly, he whipped his horse and moved forward. In the past, the young man in brocade robes angrily whipped Liangzhou city. The awakening of hibernation had passed, and the spring equinox was approaching. Su Fengnian rode alone along the heavily guarded road to Huayang Pass in the north of Liangzhou. At this time, not only was the war in Beiliang getting heavier and the world in chaos, but after Ko Jianghuai resigned and retired to the countryside, the young commander of the West Chu line, Xianxia, assumed the position of commander of the Eastern line. He fought 3 battles in a row in 10 days. Xianxia, who had previously defeated Yan Jinchuan's Iron Cavalry and Yang Xinxing's Jizhou's elite infantry, was once again met with the expectations of the West Chu imperial court. He was defeated in succession and was forced to retreat. The West Chu navy, led by Chao Chongqing, finally stopped holding back and began to push downstream. In order to reduce the pressure on Xianxia on land, they began to confront the navy of Guangling Prince Zhao Yi. On the other hand, the Prince of Yanqi, Zhao Bing, led 100,000 elite soldiers and marched northward. At the same time, the commander of the southern expedition, General Liu Xingxiang, led tens of thousands of soldiers from Nanjing's Ji camp to the south, coordinating with the southern army. The imperial court situation was good. After Yuan Tingshan made a good start in Ji Bei, Tang Taizuang, who was Gu Jintang's trusted general along with Kainan, also took the initiative to attack on the eastern line and beheaded 6,000 Beimang. For this reason, the Emperor of Liang ordered Tang Taizuang to go to the capital to replace Liu Shengxiang as the assistant minister of the Ministry of War. This general, who had the reputation of fierce tiger general, came to the capital just after the other assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Su Gong, stepped into the Tu Liao. Therefore, after Wu Congxian and Fan Chongho, the new chess saint of Liang, 10th Dan, were said to have entered the capital one after another. There was also the saying of Dragon General Su Gong and Fierce Tiger General, Dragon General Su Gong, and Fierce Tiger General. Chapter 1420. Liang Imperial Court was flourishing with each passing day, and the people were reassured, which only served to accentuate the unrest in the northwest. It was rumored that after Beiliang Road lost Huagong and Wanhe, the last barrier outside the pass, Xiaowang City, was also on the verge of collapse. Meanwhile, Hetu City, the northernmost city outside Liangzhou Pass, was also in imminent danger. What made the people of Liang even more disappointed and angry was a rumor that Yozhou's Hetu City, which was said to be able to hold off more than 100,000 Beimang cavalry, was said to be under the command of Yang Yuanzhan. Up until now, the 300,000 troops of Beimang had actually increased instead of decreasing. The people of Liang, especially the people of the capital, naturally began to speculate whether or not the Beiliang barbarians had thrown in their lot with the Beimang barbarians. Otherwise, how could there be more and more people fighting in this world? Hetu City, which was north of Huayang Pass and south of Longyan Flat, had always been said to be the best. In Su Zhao's hands, he had placed as many as 30,000 troops in this majestic town. There were nearly 10,000 cavalry and more than 20,000 infantrymen. All of them were old soldiers who were good at fighting. In addition, there were Huayang Pass and Liuya and Fuling as support. Behind this line of defense, there were Jinyuan, Qinghe, and Zhongzhong passes, as well as Xiankan and Shenwu cities as the 2 flanks of defense. Behind them were the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry, Great Ancestor Gu's infantry, and He Zhonghu's cavalry. Unlike Yozhou's Hetu City, which was passively taking a beating to the north of Liangzhou, other than Hetu City, Liuya, Fuling, and Huayang Pass, where the protectorate was located, all had the strength to mobilize cavalry. It was precisely because of this flexible and powerful fighting force roaming the rear that Hetu City's defense was filled with the bravery of everyone facing death calmly. When Su Fengnian walked into the protectorate conference hall under the escort of a group of white horses, Chu Lushan was in the middle of discussing the situation with Su Weisheng and the cavalry's deputy commander, He Zhonghu, and the others. Seeing Su Fengnian's arrival, they didn't exchange any pleasantries. Su Fengnian took the opportunity to join in without any delay. Of course, Chu Lushan couldn't completely ignore Su Fengyan, the king of Bailiang. Therefore, he gave a brief summary. Cripple Lu of Huta City is arrogant. He said that he could defend Huta City alone for a year and a half without any problem. He asked us, Lia, Fuling, and Huayang Pass, to launch an attack based on the premise that Huta City could not be lost. At the critical moment, the 10,000 elite cavalries in Huta City could even go out to fight at any time. Right now, we are calculating how Fatty Dong's 100,000 Dong family's private soldiers will be used and when they will be used. Up until now, the northern Mang troops attacking the city are still the border soldiers from Gusai Prefecture. We've given them nearly 1,000 catapults in batches of 300, and they've been attacking the city day and night. It just looks very lively. Cripple Lu said that he wasn't used to it first, but now, the Tiger Head City's defenders don't care about those disgusting catapults at night at all. They eat and sleep as usual, and there are no problems with their morale. At this point, Chu Lushan couldn't help but chuckle softly. All the armies are like crying children who want milk. They can't wait for a few dozen people to die before they talk about the situation as if it was a pile of eggs. Only our Bailiang Frontier Army is an exception. We are afraid that our parents will be worried. Even if we are beaten until we are covered in blood, we will grit our teeth and bear it. Chu Lushan continued. Luya and Fu Ling's 2 cavalry armies have already taken the initiative to attack twice. The results of the battle weren't great, but they forced Northern Mang to not let loose and besiege the city. Otherwise, if those 1,000 stone catapults were to open up on all fronts, not to mention attacking Tiger Head City, even attacking Tan City would be quite imposing. During this period, Beimang sent out a light cavalry of 30,000 men in an attempt to intercept Liuya's cavalry and give us an opportunity to attack Huayang Pass. They didn't succeed in besieging the city and attacking the reinforcements. Instead, we easily slaughtered 6,000 of them. If it wasn't for Dong Zhuo sending people to help us, we could have killed another 10,000 men. Our cavalry pushed northward to Huta City, and each of us threw out a barbarian's head. Your Highness, you didn't see the faces of those barbarians on the front lines. It was as if they hadn't been able to shit for months. Su Fengyan smiled knowingly and asked, how many casualties did Yang Yuanzhan suffer in Yuzhou? The veteran general, He Zhong, suddenly laughed heartily and said, there are already more than 50,000 casualties. In addition to the successful interception by Your Highness and Yu Luandao with the Youqi, they may have added more than 100,000 men from Jinhe and Donghe, but they were actually just putting on a show. Those 2 prefectures should have been given to the 2 Liaodong lines. In the end, they used them so early. Beimang has a lot of controversy. Everyone is cursing the king of South Courtyard for robbing Peter to pay Paul. Some people have already suggested handing over the military power to Toba Bodhisattva. If it wasn't for the order of peace, Dong Zhuo might have already packed up his things and left. Su Fengyan looked at the sand table and nodded. He said softly, we don't need to rush to a decisive victory. We just need to wear down Beimang's patience bit by bit. The battlefield has always been an extension of the court. We should aim for this battle at the end of the 2nd year of Xiangfu. If we succeed in fighting until Dong Zhuo loses the king of South Courtyard, it will be our Bailiang's victory. The following 3 years of Xiangfu will be much easier. Su Weisheng nodded quietly, agreeing with Su Fengyan's words. It was obvious that no fault is a merit, and was extremely conservative. Chu Lushan glanced at Huta City on the sand table. Then we must first ensure that Huta City is not lost. We must not let Dong Zhuo have a chance to breathe. Su Fengyan said calmly. Therefore, even if Lu Jinu and Huta City can't defend it, we must defend it. Send a message to him. In the past, Huta City was used as the Great Wu Castle in Yuzhou. Now it's different. He can die, but Huta City cannot be lost. Therefore, whenever Huta City is about to fall, no matter what method we use, we must immediately let the Protectorate know. Then, even if we have to use Jin Yuan, Qinghe Heavy Tomb, and Xuanxin Xinwu, we must reduce the pressure on them. Even the 10,000 Great Snow Dragon Cavalry and the 8,000 Heavy Cavalry can be used at the critical moment. He Zhonghu and a few famous old generals looked at each other, wanting to say something but hesitating. In Bailiang's plan, after a certain amount of Beimang's military strength was depleted, all the great Wu Castle and the 3 cities of Yuzhou could be lost. They could also lose North Pass Town in Liangzhou. There was no need to defend to the end at all costs. Was it worth it for Dongzhuo? Great Ancestor Gu closed his eyes and began to silently consider the battle situation and weigh the pros and cons. He Zhonghu unconsciously looked at Bailiang Protector General Chu Lushan. The great king of Beimang's South Courtyard had once been defeated by him. Logically speaking, Chu Lushan should be the one to refute this suggestion. However, in He Zhonghu's eyes, Chu Lushan did not speak. Instead, he interlaced his fingers on his abdomen and quickly scanned the sand table. At this moment, when even Chu Lushan did not speak, probably only Su Weisheng dared to speak. She frowned and said, "If the definition of Hutu City is changed, the entire defensive line of Liangzhou will change. This will have a huge impact on Lingzhou behind us." Su Fengnian replied, "Even if Su Beiji empties the entire Lingzhou and the area around Lingzhou, Liangzhou's provisions will not be affected." Great Ancestor Gu muttered to himself, "Fighting outside the country? Although this is Great Ancestor Gu's greatest dream, is it really suitable for northern Liang, who has been sparing no effort to expand their territory?" This was definitely the first time Su Fengnian had displayed such an unyielding stance on the matters of the border. The atmosphere in the Protector General's house was particularly solemn. Su Fengnian suddenly asked, "Commander Yuan asked for the armor I wore at the time. He said it was the Protector General's idea?" Su Weisheng's expression was strange. Chu Lushan chuckled and said, "I originally wanted to display it in this hall to look imposing. Later on, I thought about it and had someone send it to Huda City. Cripple Lu then gave it to someone else." Su Fengnian was confused. Chu Lushan withdrew his smile and said, "He gave it to our first Bailiang general to die in battle." Su Fengnian lowered his head to look at the sand table. "I know, it's Ma Ji from Huda City. At the time, in the courtyard inside the city, he sat at the very back. Because he scolded me, he didn't dare show his face." Chapter 1421. In the hall, except for Su Fengnian and Su Weisheng, the governor of Bailiang Chu Lushan, the cavalry commander Yuan Zuozong, the deputy commander Zhou Kong, and the infantry deputy commander Chu Lushan were the 4 people with the highest positions and the greatest authority. As for Su Fengnian's proposal to defend Hutu City to the death, neither Chu Lushan nor Yuan Zuozong expressed their opinions for the time being. It was Zhou Kong who argued with Great Ancestor Gu first. During the Spring and Autumn War, Great Ancestor Gu was famous for proposing the theory of the world situation and proposing that Southern Tang must fight outside the country as the policy of protecting the country. However, it was Great Ancestor Gu who seemed to have a strong sense of attack, who disagreed and did not agree with the Bailiang Frontier Army to help Lu Jinu defend Huda City to the death. On the contrary, it was Zhou Kong, who came from the Partridge headquarters camp, who agreed with Su Fengnian's point of view. Great Ancestor Gu did not care that Su Fengnian was on the spot and said mercilessly, "This kind of hasty change of strategy is more harmful to the Bailiang Frontier Army than the change of generals. How can national affairs be trifled with?" Zhou Kong also argued, "Water is impermanent, and soldiers have no solid formation. What's wrong with waiting for an opportunity to act?" In addition to the rhetorical question, Zhou Kong said something meaningful. When we made the military strategy of Bailiang in Yuliangliang province, the general and Li Yishan were still there. At that time, the original intention was that Beimang would go south to the Central Plains through Bailiang and Jizhou. The Beimang barbarians only regarded Bailiang as an impregnable city. Even if they could not go around the city directly, they would only place 500,000 to 600,000 soldiers here to impede our Bailiang frontier army, instead of attacking the 3 provinces of Yiliangliu province today. Strategies and rules are dead, but our Bailiang soldiers are alive. The more than 100,000 border cavalry in Liangzhou are not to be trifled with. Zhou Kong kept saying, "Our Bailiang," and mentioned Bailiang's early military and border cavalry. The old general's meaning was obvious. Great Ancestor Gu was an outsider who came late, but he was only the second in command of the infantry. Bailiang respected the cavalry, even more so in Liangzhou, so Great Ancestor Gu should be sensible at this time and place. In fact, the army was similar to the imperial court. Great Ancestor was ranked army was not only ranked, but also paid attention to family background. In Bailiang, those captains and generals who joined the cavalry camp from the infantry had to take a long time to get along with each other. The Northern Liang border army naturally had no objections to Great Ancestor Gu, who had been promoted by Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian frowned, but didn't say anything. Great Ancestor Gu didn't turn hostile on the spot, but his expression didn't look good either. He said coldly, "I'm just stating facts. No one denies that our border cavalry in Bailiang isn't strong enough. We only have strong combat power, but it doesn't mean that our leaders and soldiers can be squandered. War on the battlefield is like a game of chess. A national player who only knows how to play the game of chess, even if he can conquer an orphan or even slay a dragon, will lose more than gain in the overall situation. I don't want Bailiang's army to be a chess player who has the strength of a 10th Dan national player, but only the vision of a 6th Dan chess player. Bailiang now controls 4 provinces, and there are hundreds of cities, military towns, strategic passes, and impregnable passes in these 4 provinces. Don't you need to weigh the pros and cons of using Huta City as a chess piece to decide the survival of more than 100 chess pieces?" Zhou Kong clicked his tongue and said, "Why do I feel like it's Xun Zhibao talking?" Great Ancestor Gu finally said angrily, "You bastard. Today, in front of General Zhou and the King of Bailiang, I'll tell you that the Bailiang army shouldn't deny Xun Zhibao. Even the King of Bailiang has clearly proposed that the essentials of military preparation shouldn't be banned in the border army. Why can't you have a copy of it in your Liangzhou cavalry army? Zhou Kong, do you want to learn from Zhonghong Wu and be an impenetrable leader of the border army? You've disliked me for a long time, and I've disliked you for a long time, too." Usually, the commander of the cavalry army, Yuan Zuozong, would be a peacemaker. He would even help Great Ancestor Gu, an outsider, to reunite the family. He was like a mother-in-law. When his son quarreled with his daughter-in-law, he would really help his son by helping his daughter-in-law. But today, since Su Fengnian was here, Yuan Zuozong practiced the silent meditation and relaxed his mind. Chu Lushan was full of mischievous tricks, and he beamed as he watched the 2 vice-marshals blush with interest. Su Fengnian said calmly, "Those who are qualified to discuss here are all level 3 and level 2 officials. It's time to talk openly. But in the case of Huda City, we can find loopholes and fill in the gaps. But the decision to guard it for a year will not change." This sentence was said to Great Ancestor Gu. Then Su Fengnian said to Zhou Kong, "Don't ban Qin Jibao's military supplies. General Zhou, after you go back, take the lead to copy a volume, including the commandant. All the lieutenants and generals can't be exempted. After you copy it, send it to the Protectorate of Bailiang. I'll review it myself. Whoever asks someone to write it for him or refuses to copy it, I'll go to your army and have a talk with him. If we can't reach an agreement, I'll send him to you, Zhou, as an infantryman." Zhou Kong had a bitter expression as he carefully haggled. "Your Highness, that book has over 100,000 words, and a single volume has close to 10,000 words. Right now, the war is in full swing, so why don't we wait until we have time?" Su Fengnian said with a fake smile, "Then let's have a talk first. Do you want to drink some wine and ask my second sister to cook some dishes to go with the wine? After we eat and drink enough, General Zhou can go to you, Zhou." Zhou Kong hurriedly waved his hand and said with a smile, No, I'll stay up late to copy the book. Those lieutenants and commandants under my command will finish copying it within 10 days." After the 2 deputy commanders of infantry and cavalry left the Protectorate of Bailiang and went to their respective cities, Yuan Zuozong said with a smile, "It turns out that each of them will be beaten 50 times. Su Fengnian said worriedly, "Zhou Kong was beaten 50 times, but Great Ancestor Gu may feel that he was beaten 500 times. Yuan Zuozong asked, Do we need to stop him and have a private talk with him? General Gu is not that kind of stubborn person. As long as it makes sense, he will listen to it. Su Fingyan was a little helpless, but the problem is that I don't have the confidence to make sense. At that time, it will add fuel to the fire and make Great Ancestor Gu more insistent. It's better to be like now. I'm deliberately mystifying him. Great Ancestor Gu doesn't know whether I'm selling elixirs or dogskin plasters. He can only pinch his nose and do as I say. Su Fingyan saw that there were only his second sister, second brother Yuan, and Chu Lushan in the hall. He said with a wry smile, "Now we are family. Finally, I don't have to pretend to be a master." In addition to laughing at the two old generals, Chu Lushan's eyes were more on the sand table. In fact, the Protector General of Bailiang had always been famous for his political and military achievements. He had always been looked down upon and underestimated by the entire Central Plains imperial court, especially after the older generation of the Central Plains passed away one after another. Chu Lushan was only occasionally mentioned by people because he led thousands of cavalry to Shu province. Compared with Yin Wenluan and Chen Jibao, he was much inferior. He was even inferior to Yuan Zuozong, who showed his brilliance in the Battle of the Princess Tomb. At that time, people were very shocked that Chu Lushan, who was only a level 4 official, was appointed as the Protector General of Bailiang. However, the Bailiang army and its archenemy, Beimeng, were not surprised. From this, it could be seen that the Liang imperial court generally did not care about Bailiang. What the eye did not see, the heart did not feel troubled. Chu Lushan had a saying that was widely spread among the upper echelons of the Bailiang frontier army. From the first time this fatty saw the sand table, he was intoxicated. In his early years, whether there was a war or not, he liked to stare at the sand tables of various countries in a daze. No one knew what was so interesting about these things. It was only when Wu Su asked him once that Chu Lushan told the truth. He said, "It is the same principle as reading a book. After reading a book 100 times, its meaning will be revealed." Later on, when the Su and Zhao separated from each other, Chu Lushan's home in Bailiang had no less than 100 sand tables of various sizes. It was rumored that the largest one took up the entire building. There was no place to stand on the first floor. If one wanted to see the sand table, one had to go straight up the stairs to the second floor to look down. Chu Lushan looked at the sand table at the northernmost city of Liangzhou, Huda's city, and then at the southernmost city of Yuzhou, Shaoguang City. He softly said, "It's not that Huda's city can't be defended for a year. I've thought of a reason that might be able to convince Great Ancestor Gu." Chapter 1422. Chu Lushan continued, choosing Dong Zhuo from Beimeng as the king of the South Courtyard and mobilizing millions of troops from the beginning to attack Bailiang in 3 different directions, meant that Beimeng had completely given up the idea of attacking the south from Jizhou and Liao. It also meant that there must be loopholes in the strategy we made back then. What we need to do is not just amend it, but to completely destroy it in some places. Bailiang also predicted the worst situation at the beginning, but at that time, it was like fighting against an enemy. Well, for example, it was like fighting against the old god of sword Li Chungang. We guessed that the old man might use the green dragon sleeves or the sword opening heaven gate as soon as he came up. Su Weisheng whispered. At that time, we only thought that he was one of the 2 strongest men, but we didn't expect that he would use both at the same time. Chu Lushan continued. That's good. The fiercer the battle in Huda's city is, the more dangerous the defense line in Liangzhou is, and the greater our chance to win by surprise will be. Back then, Yuan Zuozong suddenly smiled and said, Chu Lushan disagreed with the strategy made by Li Yishan back then. He thought it was too righteous and only thought about how not to lose instead of how to win. Chu Lushan smiled. Now that I think about it, we had to do that at that time. Without more than 20 years of blanking, there would be no room for leeway today. Chu Lushan slowly raised his head and looked at Su Fingyan. Then, a dazzling and flattering smile blossomed on his face. He chuckled and said, Your Highness gave me the idea. Otherwise, with this little brain of mine, I would not have been able to think of it, even if I cracked my skull. Perhaps only at this time could people think of Lucio who competed with Li Gongda for the title of the best flatterer in Bailiang. Su Fengyan laughed and scolded, "Be serious." Chu Lushan continued to be nonchalant. "Didn't your highness think of it long ago? It's just that the risk is too high and you know that great ancestor Gu won't agree." Su Fengyan nodded. Su Weisheng watched the mouth of Yuzhou province on the sand table as he said, "It's hard to attack." Su Fengyan said in a deep voice, "As for whether it will be difficult to defend or easy to defend, we have given Bei Meng a chance." Yuan Zuozong squinted his eyes and said, "Therefore, Bei Meng gave up the opportunity to attack all the fortresses with Luanhe City and Wobo City as the core. Fortunately, Qi Danghua, who is also one of Su Zhao's foster sons like Yuan Zuozong and Chu Lushan, was not present. Otherwise, he would have a headache about why he was so stupid." Su Fengyan muttered to himself. Bei Meng was aiming to flatten Bailiang and then rush to the Central Plains. The civil officials of the Taiping Order were to be used in Jizhou, Hezhou, and the following Huainan province. They didn't plan to waste them in Bailiang. Under this type of situation, Yozhou's unwillingness to fight to the death and Northern Mang's unwillingness to surrender made it so that after Yang Yuanzhan's army paid a tremendous price to break through Crouching Bao and Luanhe City's defenses, the Wu Castle stronghold around Crouching Bao and Luanhe City were almost completely destroyed. Of course, from the current situation, the pros and cons are half and half. The good thing is that it will make it easier for Northern Mang's cavalry to move about within the calabash. However, if we place Northern Mang's most powerful counterattack in Yuzhou, then Yang Yuanzhan's 35 Great Army that had just received reinforcements will suffer. Chu Lushan added, "If we want to reverse the situation and force Yang Yuanzhan to retreat, we have to invest at least 50,000 of our most elite cavalry. We have to succeed in one battle. We have to wipe out Yang Yuanzhan's elite cavalry at the critical moment. Therefore, we must not lose Huda City. If we lose Huda City, we will lose Liuya and Fuling cities, as well as Huayang Pass. Once we pull the battlefront back to the Qingyuan Heavy Tomb region and allow Dongzhuo's army to comfortably push southward and spread out the battlefront, it will be difficult for us to even have 5,000 cavalrymen, let alone 50,000. Therefore, for the sake of Huta City, we might have to sacrifice 40 to 50,000 people in the second year of Xiangfu City. However, for the sake of Huta City, many of them will die." Chu Lushan revealed a gloomy smile as he stared at the mouth of Huda City on the sand table. "If all 35,000 people die here, we'll have built a huge Jingguan temple." Yuan Zuozong sneered. "It's as good as West Rampart." Su Fengyan took a deep breath before saying, "Second brother Yuan." But if so, before Su Fengyan finished his words, Yuan Baixiong, who is always serious in speech and manner, said softly for the first time, "We're family." Chu Lushan suddenly wanted to put his arm around Yuan Zuozong's shoulder with a flattering look. However, Yuan Zuozong slapped his hand away, saying, "I'm not familiar with you." Chu Lushan scolded, "I'm just a little fatter. Prince is just a little more handsome. Why do you judge people by appearance?" Su Fengyan laughed. "Stop. You're not a little fatter, and I'm not a little more handsome." Su Weisheng looked at the aggrieved and long-winded Protector General, the king of Bailiang, with a gentle smile, and Yuan Baixiong, who was full of heroic spirit. She also laughed. Unexpectedly, great ancestor Gu and Zhou Kong did not leave Huayang Pass immediately. Instead, they drank in a restaurant with little business. Zhou Kong waited for the dishes to be served with a straight face. "What? Do you think you haven't quarreled enough in the Protector General's office? Surname Gu, I'm more than willing to drink and chat with the prince when he's free. However, I can't drink or piss in the same pot with you." Great ancestor Gu laughed. "It's just that today is different from the past. If you were a general of Southern Tang in the past, I would have knocked you down with a punch if you dare to talk like this. When I beat you down and you can't say anything, I'll be the only one who can say anything unreasonable." When Zhou Kong heard these coarse words, he didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed. "Quarreling is one thing. I don't like you, great ancestor Gu, but I, Zhou Kong, have never denied that you did things very manly in Southern Tang. Otherwise, Even if I couldn't stop you from becoming the deputy commander of the infantry, I would have taken the lead to cause trouble at Prince's side. In the end, I would have troubled you. However, to be honest, you're just lucky. It was Gu Jiantang who attacked Southern Tang. If it were me, Bailiang, even if you really fought at the gate of the country to defend it, it would still be useless. Great Ancestor Gu poured himself a cup of wine and laughed softly. Whether you believe it or not, being the deputy commander in Bailiang, no matter how much you old generals dislike me, is still much more comfortable than fighting the enemy in Southern Tang. It is because I understand that outside of the battlefield, your cavalry army might not see eye to eye with me. But if we really fight, if 10,000 people have to die for me, Great Ancestor Gu, the infantry vice commander, then you definitely won't only lose 9,000 people. For a general, there's nothing more comfortable in the world than this. Therefore, the worse you scold me, the more I want to treat you to a drink, so that one day, we won't have to visit each other's graves. Zhou Kong couldn't help but laugh. In the end, Great Ancestor Gu just wants to be happy for yourself. Great Ancestor Gu laughed. If I'm not happy for myself, and you scold me, do you think I'd be willing to stick my hot face to your cold butt? You're just a deputy commander, but your position is higher than mine? Zhou Kong was stunned and sighed. Let's just drink today and not talk about military affairs. Anyway, we won't be able to reach an agreement. We can't piss into the same pot, but according to what you said, I think there's no problem drinking a pot of wine. In the end, the two old men were dead drunk. During this period, Zhou Kong and Great Ancestor Gu cursed at each other for a long time. This made the shopkeeper of the restaurant, who knew the prominent identity of the two, tremble with fear. He was afraid that the two big shots would fight because of a disagreement. At that time, their personal guards outside the restaurant would be attracted. Wouldn't his small restaurant be torn down easily? However, at the same time, the restaurant manager, who was still a soldier, also felt honored. These two were the deputy commanders of Bailiang's army. Who didn't know that any deputy commander of Bailiang was more than enough to be a general in Liang Imperial Court? In a small courtyard of Su Weisheng's temporary residence in the Protectorate office, Su Fengyan took out the two chest boxes from his bag. However, Su Weisheng didn't want them, saying that she didn't need them. Su Fengyan could only put them away resentfully. After a moment of silence, Su Fengyan squatted beside Su Weisheng's wheelchair and sighed softly. After going through Jianghu 3 times, I finally understand why you didn't want me to struggle in Jianghu. Su Weisheng asked, "Why do you say that?" Su Fengyan smiled and said, "People in Jianghu want to live a meaningful life. As Su Zhao's son, I probably want to live a meaningful life." Su Weisheng shook her head and said, "Don't flatter me, and don't boast about yourself. From the beginning to the end, I just want you to live well. It's that simple. Our mother, father, your master, and even Yuan Zhuozong and Chu Lushan didn't want you to die a meaningful life. They would rather you live a meaningless life." Su Fengyan sighed and said, "I see." Chapter 1423. There's one more chapter in the afternoon and one more in the evening. It's not that I'm splitting it up on purpose. The earlier I upload it, the earlier I can read it. Moreover, each chapter will definitely have at least 4,000 to 5,000 words. P.S. A lot of foreshadowing, but in the end, it will become a magnificent battle. After Su Fengyan arrived at Huayang Pass, Su Weisheng went south to return to Mount Qingliang the next day. The remaining Su Fengyan also began to live in seclusion, not interfering in the affairs of the Protectorate. Qi Danghua, who was stationed on the Qingyuan front line, would occasionally ride his horse over to relieve Su Fengyan's boredom. The two would often leave the pass together under the banner of hunting. They would bring several hundred elite cavalry to approach Huta's city and watch the flames and smoke of battle from a distance. If they encountered a small group of Beimeng horses, they would be treated as an appetizer for Qi Donghua's white feather guards, who were the most skilled in cavalry and archery in the Bailiang frontier army. The Protectorate naturally didn't dare to raise any objections to this. They only secretly scattered many crossbowmen on white horses outside the pass to guard against any accidents. On this day, it was the spring equinox. Thunder roared, wheat sprouted, and the sun rose a total of 42,000 li. Su Fengnian rode out alone in the early morning. In order not to burden the protectorate and the crossbowmen, he didn't go north to Hoda's city. Instead, he leisurely headed east to Fuling City. One of the 50 or so crossbowmen on guard duty didn't dare to disturb the king of Bailiang's relaxation. However, probably because he wanted to personally witness the elegance of Su Fengnian, one of the 4 great grandmasters of the world, the commander of the archery team also put in some thought. He allowed the 50 or so riders under his command to have the opportunity to move to within 200 paces of Su Fengnian. However, after that, they had to quickly retreat, otherwise they would be dealt with according to military law. Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he just pretended that he didn't see anything. Su Fengnian looked up at the clear sky and suddenly laughed. When he was young, he didn't understand why a cloudless sky was considered good weather. He always felt that the clouds floating in the sky were beautiful, especially the fiery clouds. When he was young, in the prison like Dantong Pass, he would be happy for several days every time he saw the clouds, together with the little beggar who he only knew was Zhao Zhu a long time later. The 2 children could watch the clouds for hours without feeling bored. Ever since they parted, Su Fengnian was always worried that the little beggar wouldn't be able to find food and that he might starve or freeze to death on the street one day. He didn't expect to reunite with the little beggar many years later at the Spring God Lake. All these years, the little beggar had been living well. However, the little beggar had suddenly become His Royal Highness, the Lord of Southern Jiang. Su Fengnian suddenly stopped his horse and turned his head to the south. In the distance, 4 riders were heading north. When they saw Su Fengnian's figure, they spurred their horses and headed straight for him. Before they arrived, the commander of the crossbowmen on the white horse came to Su Fengnian's side first. He got off his horse and saluted respectfully. "Your Highness, the 4 riders should be Jianghu people who were selected by the Fish Dragon Gang to join the army at the border. Do you want me to stop them?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "No, you can retreat to Huaiyang Pass first." The commander of the archery team accepted the order without hesitation. Although they were sent by the protectorate, it was obvious who was the most powerful person in Bailiang and who the 300,000 border soldiers should listen to. Moreover, who was the prince? Did he really need crossbowmen to protect him? However, after the sturdy commander mounted his horse, he said shyly for the first time, "Your Highness, if I may be so bold as to say, we've all heard about what happened outside Gourdmouth in Yuzhou. If there's a chance in the future, all of the crossbowmen in Liangzhou would like to fight side by side with your Highness." Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. The commander of the archery team patted his horse and left excitedly. He was someone who had spoken to the king of Bailiang. If he went back and told the commandant and those bastards, wouldn't they be jealous? After galloping for several hundred steps, the commander of the archery team looked back. Looking at the figure of the man and his horse, he thought, "Our prince is really the most romantic person in the world. He's also so amiable and approachable. If he were in the Central Plains, how many young girls would die for him?" The commander of the archery team immediately felt indignant. Although he had heard that Mount Xingliang already had 2 potential princesses who had not yet been officially married and had good reputations, it was still too few. Once the crossbowmen were far away, the 4 riders quickly arrived. When they saw Su Fengnian, the leader of the riders was a white-haired but hale and hearty old man. The old man with the sword on his back sized him up and asked with a smile, "Does little brother know where Huaiyang Pass is?" Su Fengnian smiled and pointed out the way for the old man. The old man cupped his hands and thanked Su Fengnian before he introduced himself. He had a heroic spirit of Jianghu. "I'm from Qingsong County in Jiangnan. My Jianghu friends have given me the nickname Skydrome. May I ask if little brother is like us, someone who has come to the Bailiang border to join the army?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "I'm originally from the border army. My father's generation has already settled down in Bailiang." The old man nodded and said, "I see. I've been rude." The old man smiled helplessly and said with some self-mockery, "It's not that I'm a chatterbox. It's just that the 4 of us are unfamiliar with this place. When I heard that the Baimang barbarian army of 1 million was coming south to knock on the pass, I followed my father and master to Jibei when I was young and killed the barbarians beyond the Great Wall. Now, I couldn't hold back my anger and heard that the Fish Dragon Gang, one of the top 10 gangs in the world, could recommend us outsiders to the Bailiang Frontier Army. So, I brought 3 disciples to Bailiang. The Fish Dragon Gang only gave us 4 temporary travel permits, and we suffered a lot on the way north. One of the young men with a long sword on his waist said angrily, "Master," when we met the Bailiang Frontier Army, they were confident in their combat power. What's the difference between the way they looked at us and the way they looked at the barbarians? Su Fengyan's 3 trips to Jianghu were not in vain. He immediately understood the meaning behind it. It must be that this group of people relied on their martial arts and had a conflict with the Bailiang Frontier Army. Otherwise, they would not have used the prefix confident in their combat power. Instead, they would have directly pointed out the latter sentence. However, what Su Fengyan was curious about was that the Fish Dragon Gang had opened their doors to recruit people from Jianghu. This was originally instructed by Wu Tongyan and Fu Shuifang. However, most of them were low-level masters who were opportunistic and could not survive in Liang Jianghu, so they fled to Bailiang to find a place to stay. There were only 16 people who were willing to go to Bailiang's border to join the army, and those who had some foundation in martial arts were clearly recorded in the Governor General's office. However, this old swordsman, who Su Fengyan had never heard of before, was a real master of the realm of master. This kind of master could easily establish a sect on Liang Jianghu and become a leader in the martial arts world of the county. It was not difficult for him to go to the capital's Ministry of Justice and get a cart bag to hang around his waist. Su Fengyan casually observed the 4 riders. Other than the level 2 master's gaze, the other 3 people each had their own merits. The young man with a sword at his waist had an arrogant attitude. He had long heard that Bailiang had many talented disciples. This stranger who appeared at the border of the Great Wall for no reason and was not wearing armor and carrying a sword was most likely one of them. The middle-aged swordsman should be the eldest disciple of the master of martial arts in Jiangnan. He was relatively mature and prudent. He discreetly sized up Su Fengyan's hand, trying to find clues that he had once practiced martial arts. He had a lot of experience in Jianghu and did not believe that there would be an ordinary person riding alone in the vicinity when hundreds of thousands of Beimang soldiers were attacking Huda City. As for the last woman in black who wore a veil hat to cover her face, she was also curiously examining the man in front of her, who did not look like a Bailiang. He looked more like a young master from a Jiangnan noble family. Su Fengyan smiled and said, "It doesn't matter what other people think. I just have to be myself. If you really want to talk about things with your eyes, haven't you been looking at us, Bailiang, for 20 years since you left Yang Dynasty?" The young swordsman probably could barely stand the arrogance of the Bailiang Frontier Army, but he could not stand the arrogance of a Bailiang disciple of the same age. He immediately became angry. The 4 of us came to Bailiang in the middle of nowhere to join the army. We came to break through enemy lines and kill the enemy, not to listen to the mocking and ridicule of people like you. If it weren't for the fact that my master and the second guest of Mount Hui, Hong Yu, were close friends, the old man's expression was stern. He stopped his disciple from continuing to speak without fear. Chonghe. Chapter 1424. The young man called Chonghe turned his head away and silently sulked. In the Jianghu of Jiangnan, he had always been a cultured and refined gentleman of the sword. He shouldn't have been so rude and disrespectful. However, now that he was outside the barren Bailiang Pass, he often rode his horse for a day without seeing anyone. He was not acclimatized to the environment and was unbearably sullen. Thinking back to his hometown in the Central Plains, it should be a beautiful season in the misty rain. There would be alleys selling apricot flowers, boating on lakes, and dancing in brothels all night long. Even if he didn't do anything, it was still enjoyable to practice martial arts with his martial brothers and sisters in the deep courtyard of his home. It was better than drinking wind and eating sand and being bullied in the northwest border. Su Fengyan smiled and asked, "How about I lead the way for you?" The young man immediately muttered, being unaccountably solicitous, "He definitely doesn't have good intentions. Isn't he still having bad intentions towards my sister?" The old man glared at his disciple, who was shooting his mouth off. He then turned to Su Fengyan. Without being pretentious, he laughed heartily and said, "That's just as well. When we reach the Great Wall and hand over the travel pass, I'll definitely treat little brother to a few jeans of green ant wine. To tell you the truth, I have long heard of this wine. However, when I tasted it in the past, the taste, I don't dare to compliment it. I didn't think that now that I am in Bailiang, the more I drink, the more I can't put it down. I bought 2 pounds of wine at Lonko Pass in Liangzhou, and it was empty in less than 2 days. Now the wine worm in my stomach is revolting fiercely." The 5 of them traveled together. The old man and Su Fengyan chatted about Bailiang's local customs. They had a tacit understanding not to ask about each other's identities. It was a big taboo to talk about such things with strangers. However, the young swordsman quickly couldn't hold himself back. His voice was neither soft nor loud, just loud enough for Su Fengyan to hear. He said, "Sister, the founding emperor of the Great Feng dynasty once wrote a letter to the master of the grasslands. He said, 'To the north and west of Jizhou, the place where the bow is drawn is under your command. And to the south and east of Jizhou, the crown and belt are to be built by me. Tens of thousands of people will plow and weave. My subjects and lords will live in peace, and there will be no tyranny.'" The young woman's voice was gentle. "Senior brother, didn't you say that when you first entered Bailiang?" In front, Su Fengyan laughed and said, "This is for me, a Bailiang barbarian from the west of Ji province." The old man who was running side by side with Su Fengyan smiled knowingly. "Little brother, you're so magnanimous." Su Fengyan joked, "It's because I've been holding it in bit by bit. Otherwise, I would have suffered internal injuries." The young man named Chong, he was obviously seriously injured. Su Fengyan suddenly said, "The Hong you are familiar with, is it the Hong Yu who recently became the Deputy General of the Rouge Heavy Cavalry?" The old man hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "That's him." Su Fengyan laughed. "Senior, you've already handed over your travel permit at the Protectorate. You'll have to go south again for a while, to the grave, to find General Hong. At that time, I'll ask someone to lead the way for you. Otherwise, you really might not be able to see General Hong. It's not that we Bailiang are narrow-minded. It's just that General Hong's current position is very special. Not to mention you, even many of the Bailiang frontier army generals with real power can't easily see those heavy cavalry." Then the old man and Su Fengyan looked at each other and smiled. They didn't need to say anything. Then the two talked about interesting stories of the Central Plains Jianghu. The old man was very knowledgeable and talkative. He talked about the current situation of Mount Hui, about the Rouge Heavy Cavalry's civil and military evaluations, and about the general evaluations. He couldn't suppress his exultation. "With little brother's insight, I'm sure you know why I put the general evaluations at the end. The general evaluations include Liang, Beimang, and Bailiang, while the general evaluations only include Liang. This is probably the most important evaluation since the fall of the Great Feng dynasty. There are 10 people in the general evaluations. There are 4 in Liang: Chun Jibao, Chao Changqing, Gu Jiantang, and Lu Xingxiang. Beimang has 3: Dong Zhuo, Lu Gue, and Yang Yuanzan. Bailiang has Yin Wenwan, Chu Lushan, and Great Ancestor Gu. At the end of the general evaluations, there are additional comments on Xie Shibian, Ko Jianghuai, Tuoba Chiyun, Zhong Tan, and Song Li. Su Fengyan joked, "Yuan Zuozong didn't make the list." "I'm not convinced." Perhaps the young swordsman didn't like Su Fengyan, so he couldn't help but argue. Bailiang is still not satisfied. There are 3 people in the general evaluations. If you add Qin Jibao, who rode in a shoe alone, there are 4. That's almost half of the rankings. In addition, there's the young king of vassal state who became one of the 4 grandmasters. There's also Su Yambing who suddenly appeared. As for the evaluations, there's also Bailiang's junior guardian Chen Wang and Sun Yin. They're on the same level as Yin Maochun. What else does Bailiang want? Su Fengyan smiled calmly. That's why Bailiang is a good place. Not only do we have barbarians, but we also have scholars who can turn the tide and help the people. The guy instantly suffered another internal injury. The woman in the hat covered her mouth and smiled. The old man sighed. For so many years, this old man has always been puzzled by one thing. With Bailiang's manpower and material resources, how can they support the 300,000 cavalry at the border? Su Fengyin said softly. In order to compete with Beimang, the Liang army claims to have 800,000 cavalry. It's more than the Dafeng dynasty at its peak, half in Bailiang and half in Liang. For some reason, when the four of them heard this, their eyes were filled with the monotonous and desolate scenery of the Northwest. They couldn't help but have a complicated feeling. As they approached the Huayang Pass, Su Fengyin asked, "Senior, if you didn't know Hong Yu, who was a general in Bailiang, would you still come to Bailiang?" The old man was stunned and said calmly, "Of course not." Su Fengyin nodded slightly. His expression didn't change. However, the old man soon smiled and said, "But since Su Zhao's death, the muddled account of unrighteous spring and autumn has come to an end. I believe this old man isn't the only one who thinks this way. Many people of the older generation think the same way." Since that young man, surnamed Su, said those words in Tai and City, as long as they didn't have a blood feud with him, many of the knots in their hearts were untied. After entering Bailiang, this old man heard a lot of things and realized that many things were very different from what he imagined. In the future, he'll find time to write to his old friends in his hometown and tell them about a different Bailiang. It turns out that here, there's also the sound of books, the sound of chickens and dogs, and when the old man said this, he couldn't help but laugh. There's also the wine cellar who makes me regret that I didn't come 30 or 40 years earlier. Su Fengyin said seriously, "Cold women are just like the green ant wine that burns like fire in the mouth. Once you're addicted to it, it'll be hard to change to another wine in your life." The young man snorted and said, "Then why did your king of Bailiang marry 2 women from other places?" Su Fengyin was speechless for a moment. After a moment of silence, he turned his head and said helplessly, "This time, I admit defeat because your swordsmanship is unparalleled." At first, the young man looked smug. Then he put on a cold face. But soon, the corners of his mouth curled up. When he looked at this abominable Bailiang son again, he didn't seem so annoying. The Huayang Pass that appeared in the vision of the 5 riders was different from Hoda's city and Liu Fuling. Since it was named Pass, it meant that one man could hold the pass against 10,000 men. It also meant that once the smoke of war rose, this place would become a battlefield for the military. Most of the passes mentioned in military books were like this. No matter the size, as long as one wanted to cross the border quickly, one had to take down these passes that were built on the roads and strategic locations. Only then could one drive straight in without any worries. On the contrary, there were many majestic cities and huge towns that looked very awe-inspiring. But once the battle began, they could very well circle around the city. There were many such cities in the Liang defense line, but this didn't mean that their appearance was meaningless. On the contrary, although their existence didn't have much of an effect in stopping the enemy's army, their existence itself was a type of deterrent. To the northern Mang, they were a type of chicken ribs. If they attacked, they would suffer heavy losses. If they circled around, their supplies would be in danger. However, all the cities were rooted and unmoving. Generals and military strategies were flexible. When the time came, it would depend on who was stronger and who was stronger. Bailiang was lacking in depth. The most tragic thing about it was that every inch of its territory was a place of death where blood would flow. Since Beimang attacked Bailiang with the power of the entire country, it was under the premise that Bailiang would force them to fight for territory inch by inch. They still had to rely on their national strength to crush them. At this time, Su Fengyin outside the Huayang Pass was a little worried. He wasn't worried about the aggressive Beimang army. Instead, he was thinking about the farmer's proverb that every second of the wheat in the spring equinox was worth 1,000 gold. He thought about how many Bailiang people would have a shortage of food this year. He thought about the children who were still in private school when he passed through the Tuma Pass. They would probably be even more envious of the thin-skinned but filled meat buns. At this time, the graceful woman with the hat on her head held back her shyness and quietly stared at the man whose name she didn't know. There was only one thought in her mind that made her embarrassed. If only he was the young great-grandmaster that she yearned for day and night. If only he was the king of Baelyang that many of her close friends in her hometown adored. When they heard that she was coming to Baelyang, many of the noble ladies who only knew how to do needlework, who were usually gentle and graceful, almost eloped with her. Her master laughed and said that this kind of scene that made all the men in the world beat their chests and stamp their feet was probably only seen many years ago when Li Chungang roamed the Jianghu with a sword. Now, how many people didn't miss the beautiful women in Jiangnan? Chapter 1425. During the spring equinox of the second year of Xiangfu, if it was said that no one cared about the increasingly intense war in the northwest, then the situation of Guangling Road, which was originally going well, suddenly took a turn for the worse, making the capital of Liang very worried. All of this originated from the young man at the western border of Xia. After the soldiers on the eastern front of Guangling had gotten used to code Zhenghuai's mysterious movements, the main general Song Li slowly pushed forward step by step, continuously reducing the space for the West Chu army to perform. Not only did he take back all of the lost land, he also successfully instigated a number of West Chu officers who had rebelled at that time. He compressed the 20,000 infantrymen of West Chu's main force to the front line of Dangyin River and Crow Cry Valley. At that time, not only did Song Li's army have 30,000 Guangling Road infantrymen, there were also 8,000 elite cavalry who were good at fighting as a mobile force. In addition, Song Li had always been steady in commanding troops. No matter how one looked at it, it was a situation where victory was in the bag. The only problem was whether or not they could break into the old capital of West Chu before Lixia. But it was at this moment where victory was at their fingertips that the inferior Xianxia suddenly began to exert force, taking the initiative to attack. Afterwards, it was rumored that Song Li's cavalry moved out in full force, wanted to use several thousand cavalry to thin out the enemy's formation. Using the grassland nomadic cavalry's best move, the 8,000 cavalry were divided into 3 groups, and each group was divided into 5 horizontal groups. The nomadic cavalry was at the front, and the elite cavalry was at the back. Facing the enemy's rear, the elite cavalry quickly passed through the gaps and charged forward, launching a projectile attack. Then, under the situation where the battle line was neat and tidy, the elite cavalry retreated, and the light cavalry retreated in turn. But Xianxia only had 5,000 strong, heavily armored infantrymen, holding MO swords more than 10 feet long, to form a dense horizontal formation at the front. Ignoring the arrows, they advanced like a wall. When the shrinking Guangling cavalry had no choice but to launch a true charge, facing these heavily armored infantrymen who were like great halberds of West Chu, it was actually a phrase that made the officials of the Ministry of War of Taiyan City look at each other in dismay. Men and horses will be crushed when they meet them. Then, the scattered remnants of the cavalry could only use their own infantry to circle out of the battlefield. What followed was an even more tragic infantry battle. Although the Guangling infantry, whose morale had hit rock bottom, did not retreat, it was still difficult to stop West Chu's advance. The main general, Song Li, did not hesitate to personally charge into the formation, leading 800 men to break through West Chu's MO sword formation. Even so, in the following battle, Xianxia, who had been jokingly called by the Liang imperial court before the battle, even the cleverest housewife cannot cook without rice, repeatedly mobilized troops that had been biding their time to enter the battlefield. There were less than 1,000 of them, but all of them accurately remedied a few dangerous situations. Song Li was not a mediocre general, fighting bravely. Twice, he led troops to within 100 steps of Xianxia's formation and was forced back by arrows. Afterwards, Xianxia used the thousands of cavalry hidden in ambush to charge into the formation. Song Li had long prepared for this. Even though the battle was at a stalemate, he still strictly ordered the cavalry that had suffered heavy losses not to enter the battle formation lightly to support his side. He only allowed the cavalry captains to lead 500 cavalry to take turns killing the enemy. This was the only way to prevent the Guangling cavalry and infantry from collapsing in one battle under the charge of the 3,000 West Chu cavalry. The two armies of West Chu and Guangling fought from noon to dusk. Corpses were strewn all over the field. Xianxia's 20,000 infantry had suffered more than 15,000 casualties. When Song Li's 40,000 infantry and 8,000 cavalry finally retreated from the battlefield, there were less than 5,000 people left who could still fight. However, the truth that truly made the soldiers on both sides feel a chill run down their spines was that when Song Li took the initiative to retreat more than 10 li away from the battlefield, Xianxia sent out 3,000 light cavalry that seemed to have descended from the heavens. Meanwhile, the ones who stopped this cavalry from expanding their pursuit were the 5,000 ambushes that Song Li also wanted to use to win by surprise. The Liang Imperial Court. In the court meeting after the urgent memorials arrived in the capital, all heavily criticized Song Li, saying that he was muddle-headed in his use of troops and that he had a great advantage but was not able to control the situation. The emperor was furious and ordered Song Li to go to the capital to beg for forgiveness. However, in the small court meeting that only the central government officials met, Son of Heaven Zhao Zhuan was the first to praise Song Li. He said that he was not in the Guangling army, much less Song Li. The second-in-command of the Secretariat, Zhao Yuling, even said that although Song Li had caused the Guangling war situation to deteriorate, because before Lu Xingxiang entered the border, Guangling temporarily had no power to fight on land. They could only place their hopes on Guangling Prince Zhao Yi's navy. However, in the end, they only lost a small battle to test the depth of West Chu's military power. At that time, the old General Yang Xianxia was also included in the small court meeting. He immediately knelt down and begged for forgiveness, sobbing silently. However, he did not absolve himself. Instead, he said that Yin Zhenxuan's death was the fault of him and the old soldiers of Ji province. The emperor, Zhao Zhuan, did not pursue the matter further. Instead, he comforted this old general who had brought shame to the imperial court. He even appointed his eldest son, Yang Huchen, who had lost an arm during the Battle of Guangling, as the deputy general of Ji province, to lead the infantry of Jinan, who had been through hundreds of battles not long ago, to Jibei, to make up for his father's mistake. After the spring equinox, the 100,000-strong army of Nanjiang had arrived in Xianxia. Yin King Zhaobing fell sick along the way and had no choice but to let Crown Prince Zhao Zhu lead the troops. At the same time, General Lu Xingxiang and the old general of the same generation as Yang Xianxia and Yin Zhenxuan led the troops on two fronts, a total of 40,000 elites. They worked together with the Nanjiang army to pincer the West Chu rebels. Before this, the Liang Imperial Court seemed to have used a huge loss of 90,000 casualties and the death of a king to create the fame of Xie Shibian and Ko Jianghuai, these two young men of West Chu. At such a time, West Chu made a sound that shocked the world. After Su Xiao, another king of the dynasty, Chun Zhibao, wrote a letter to the capital saying that he had raised 10,000 soldiers and could assist Guangling at any time, although it was rejected by the Ministry of War. However, the imperial court was still shocked and praised him as the sound of spring thunder. It was enough to see the special position of the white-clothed war saint in the hearts of the people of Liang. It seemed that in Liang's eyes, those traitors of northern Liang, such as Chun Zhibao, the Confucian Grandmaster Yao Baifeng, the imperial relative Yin Jieshi, and Jin Lanting, who was now the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, were all particularly pleasing to the eyes of Taiyan City. Within the Bailiang Governor-General House, Su Fengyin and Chu Lushan led a group of Liangzhou border generals to discuss the victory of Xie Shibian and Song Li. This was perhaps the only entertainment of the Bailiang generals during wartime. Huayang Pass Lieutenant Huang Laifu's words were full of disdain. Didn't this Xie family kid learn his military tactics from us? In areas where the battle lines are not fully spread out, he secretly accumulates strength and throws it into the battlefield in batches at critical moments. Our Bailiang frontier army's most observant lieutenants all know this. The only thing he can take out is the MO sword array that that he learned from who knows where. But it is still all right to deal with the Guangling cavalry. But against our cavalry, it is the same as the West Shu great halberd warriors of the past. Su Fingyan said, after all, this is the first time since the spring and autumn period that a cavalry on foot has been used. No matter how strong Song Li's cavalry is, we should give feel of it. Do you have a detailed layout of the MO sword formation? As always, Chu Lushan was looking at the various geographical details on the sand table. Hearing this, he raised his head and smiled. I'm still waiting for news from Fu Shuifeng. However, based on the rough losses on both sides, Xie MO sword formation should be much more complete than the great halberd battle formation of the past. I believe that Gu Jintang's Tu Liao side will soon be popularized, and he will have to ask for a large sum of money from the Lion of the Ministry of Revenue. The sturdy commandant from Qingyuan Army Town frowned and said, based on the spy report, Xie and Song Li are not of the same mind. They are both shrewd and cunning, and are very cautious and bold in their use of writing. In the past, I've only heard that Ko Jianghuai of West Chu is adept at long-distance raids without regard for the strength of his legs. Even if his overall strength is less than the enemy's, he can still fight with many on the battlefield. Furthermore, he has never defended or besieged a city. He fights as if his infantry can be used as cavalry. It's very chewy. Chu Lushan laughed cruelly. Ko Jianghuai is using a string of dazzling victories to tell the world how to fight in the Central Plains in the future. It's no longer as simple as you besiege a city and I defend it. All campaigns have the goal of eliminating the enemy's strength. If you hide in the city like a turtle, I'll find a way to force you out of the city to fight. If you have a large number of troops coming out of the city, I won't fight first. I'll find the right opportunity to defeat you once again. In any case, it's just a quick cut of flesh. 1 to 2 gene of flesh each time. After a few more times, you'll only see the bones. If great ancestor Gu's suggestion of fighting outside the city for the first time was enough to broaden the horizons of the military strategists of later generations, then Ko Jianghuai's novel way of fighting is a perfect extension. It can probably be called fighting outside the city to weaken the meaning of the city to the greatest extent. If used well, one can seize the initiative everywhere. Of course, when I was fighting in the hinterland of Beimang, I was already playing like this. It's just that the spearhead wasn't aimed at Liang, so those court officials didn't know how to feel pain. Luya rubbed his chin and said, Guangling Dao finally has a general who understands military affairs like Song Li to support them. That emperor of Liang must have been kicked in the head by a donkey. Just like that, he took him to Taiyan City to denounce him. It's obvious that Zhao Yi's navy will also be eaten by Chao Chongqing. Chapter 1426. Su Fingyan shook his head and said softly, purely from the Battle of Guangling, we shouldn't have touched Song Li. But looking at the overall situation, the imperial court's actions that seem to be destroying their own foundations are actually of the same origin. Back then, the spring and autumn 8 kingdoms were destroyed and the generals were given out. Now, the Zhao family wants to gather all the military power in the world so that they can deal with the future war with Beimang. Yang Xinxing and Yin Jinxuan and the private armies under their command quelling the rebellion were one side of the matter. The Tangxi sword immortal Liu Baijie, the southern expedition commander-in-chief Liu Xingxiang, the Longxiang general Su Gong, the western Liaoning general Tang Taihuang, and the current Song Li, these people entered the capital one after another to become officials. The imperial court intentionally allowed West Chu to revive the country. Other than not expecting West Chu to give them such a big show of strength from the start, everything else happened as expected. Even the king of Yin, sending 100,000 troops up north to support, was arranged long ago. Don't look at how West Chu cleared out the Guangling battlefield in one go. In reality, he was just helping the imperial court to kill more people. In the end, the imperial court is using this to weaken the vassals and suppress the power of the local generals. It can be considered an open conspiracy. After Liu Ye had cursed the 2 emperors of the Zhao family for not being good people, he immediately smiled at Su Fingyan and said, Your Highness's way of looking at problems is indeed different from us. It's a tall building. And what's a tall building? Huang Laifu hurriedly said, "Tall building, his mother. I forgot about it." Chu Lushan rubbed his forehead, feeling a little embarrassed. Su Fingyan smiled and said, "From a strategically advantageous position." The two captains said in unison, "Yes, from a strategically advantageous position." Then they each praised, "Your Highness is extremely talented. Your Highness is very knowledgeable." Our Bailiang Protector General's eyes seemed a little melancholic. Su Fingyan joked, "That's enough. Flattery is not suitable for you guys. You guys should just lead your troops in a battle. In the future, when we win a great battle, I can flatter you guys without a problem." The entire hall burst into laughter. After Chu Lushan returned to the sand table of northern Liang and finished discussing the arrangements with the generals, Su Fingyan and Su Fingyan walked toward Chu Lushan's residence. After Su Fingyan walked into the cramped courtyard, he said emotionally, "It's been hard on you." Habitually, Chu Lushan bent over and said with a smile, "Although Lucio has been living a luxurious life all these years, back when she was so poor, she would be overjoyed if she could have a hot steamed bun to eat." Later on, she joined the Su family's army. That was how she gained this fat bit by bit. Wang, you might not believe it, but Lucio was once as thin as a match. Her entire body added up to about 120 caddies of meat. But at that time, her flesh was firm and she could endure hardships. Su Fingyan really didn't know about this. He looked at Lucio, who was as fat as a mountain. "I can't imagine what you looked like when you were thin." Chu Lushan sighed. "That's right. Even I almost forgot about it." Su Fingyan had specially brought those 2 jars of chess pieces today. Chu Lushan had someone find a finely made torreya wood chessboard. The two sat across from each other after not seeing each other for a long time. Su Fingyan played white. Chu Lushan played black. They started the game. Su Fingyan lost. Chu Lushan finally won, because Chu Lushan had waited for so many years. Finally, he didn't have to deliberately go easy. Sitting cross-legged on a large embroidered stool, Chu Lushan looked dazedly at the chessboard. He sighed and said, "Today, I finally know the true depth of His Royal Highness's chess skills." It turns out that Lucio was going easy on him back then, and His Royal Highness had never worked hard. Hearing the somewhat unfamiliar title, His Royal Highness, Su Fingyan became absent-minded for a moment. He sighed and said, "I sent people to Qingzhou to find Lu Su, but the result was disappointing. Lu Su told me that he would rather go to the capital than come to Bailiang." Chu Lushan grinned and said, "Everyone has their own aspirations. You can't force them." Su Fingyan grunted and said helplessly, "I heard that Su Xiao had captured many scholars of the spring and autumn period, but most of the people he liked weren't willing to work under him. He could only let them go." Chu Lushan smiled awkwardly and said softly, "Foster father did let them go, but many of them were secretly killed by Lucio afterward. Among them was the elder of Yuan Baixiong's best friend." Su Fingyan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "No wonder second brother Yuan said he wanted to light your sky lantern." Chu Lushan chuckled. "Unlike Mr. Zhao, I came from a poor background like Mr. Li. I was born to be at odds with aristocratic figures. I don't have Mr. Li's magnanimity. Back then, when I saw those arrogant fellows, I couldn't wait to chop off their heads. Now that I think about it, I should have been more lenient and killed fewer people back then." Su Fingyan was speechless. Chu Lushan twirled a cool chess piece between his fingers and said, "Putting aside the officials of spring of Eternal Hui, Tang Shi Sword Immortal Lu Baijia, head of the Secretariat Qianglong, Imperial College's Left Chancellor Yao Baifeng, Donyuan Pavilion's Grand Scholar Yan Jieshi, Southern Expedition Commander Lu Xingxiang, Dragon General Su Gong, and so on. These people were invited by Zhao Dun to the capital to fill the vacancy after the collapse of Zhonglu. As for Song Kelly and the others, they were chess pieces that Zhao Dun deliberately suppressed when he was alive, so that the next emperor could show his majesty. Then Assistant Minister of the Ministry of War Tang Tais Wang, New Chess Saint Fan Changho, Guangling Sec Song Li, Junior Guardian Shen Wang, Ji Province's General Yuan Tingshan, Sun Yin, and Lu Su are the newcomers cultivated by the new emperor Zhao Zhuan himself. Chu Lushan sneered. Apart from the unreasonable moves against our Baoyong, the other moves are all in line with orthodox chess theory. Su Fengyin sighed emotionally. Zhao Dun must have thought it through carefully before choosing the fourth prince Zhao Zhuan and not the first prince Zhao Wu. We can't deny this. So far, Zhao Zhuan has done a flawless job. Chu Lushan suddenly looked at Su Fengyin with a playful gaze. Su Fengyin rolled his eyes. Don't get the wrong idea. There's nothing between me and that empress. Do you think that the imperial family of the Zhao clan is blind? Besides, it's not like you don't know that Yin Dongwu and Li Fuzhen are the same. Both of them ignored me back then. To be precise, they saw me as an enemy. Chu Lushan smiled mischievously. Lucio is just thinking about what's good for her. Su Fengyin scolded with a smile. Do you really think all the women in the world should like me? Chu Lushan put down the chess piece and stretched out both hands, saying with a righteous expression, Your Highness, you don't know, but there are at least 8,000, if not 10,000, young ladies from influential families in the Central Plains who are in love with you. Chu Lushan said leisurely, There's nothing we can do about it. In the 100 years of the Jianghu, there might be quite a few people with peerless martial arts, but there are very few who are handsome and elegant. Counting them, there's only old sword god Li Chungang, Wang Xinji, that old geezer, Tooba Bodhisattva, a northern barbarian, Dong Tai. It's true that his swordsmanship is profound, but it's a pity that he can't get past his appearance. Originally, Qi Xianzhu and Chao Chongqing could each be counted as one, but one was a Taoist immortal who never entered the world, and the other was a bookworm who only wanted to restore his country. So only Your Highness lived up to everyone's expectations. You went to Liang Lake twice and had countless interesting stories. You also went to Taiyan City and became the Grand King of Baoyong. You even killed Wang Xinji, and there were countless rare calligraphy and paintings that you identified as fake circulating in the capital in Jiangnan. At the same time, there was the rise of Xueping and Xianyuan Qingfeng, which was equivalent to creating momentum for Your Highness, who had personally visited Mount Hui. How could those ladies not go crazy? It's really like rain after a long drought. Su Fengyin really didn't know that this would happen. He said self-mockingly, If that's the case, then there will definitely be more people who hate our Baoyong in the future. Chu Lushan laughed heartily. Of course, let's not talk about the distant ones. Just take those aunties in Yinji County who don't have to worry about marriage. As long as a matchmaker says which family's man looks a bit like Your Highness, the market will suddenly become hot. Su Fengyin could only laugh it off. After a moment of silence, the atmosphere in the room seemed to change. Chu Lushan suddenly asked seriously, Your Highness, there's something I don't know if I should say. Su Fengyin said, You can ask, but you might not answer. For Lucio to ask so seriously, it wasn't that Su Fengyin was deliberately mystifying things, but that he really didn't have the confidence to give an answer. As expected, Chu Lushan asked a very tricky question. After Your Highness went to Beimang, especially after returning to Baoyong, with Su Huainan's head, Lucio knew that the war with Beimang would be different from what everyone had imagined. So, Chu Lushan must ask Your Highness today, if there comes a day when Your Highness has to make the same choice as adoptive father did back then, what choice would you make? Su Fengyin hesitated. Chu Lushan stared fixedly at him and quickly said, Your Highness knows one thing. When the time comes, the person sitting on the dragon throne in the Zhao family might not necessarily be Zhao Zhuan. It might be that Zhao Zhu who was with Your Highness at Danton Pass. Su Fengyin didn't say anything. Instead, it was Chu Lushan who asked the question, who continued, If that time really comes, the same choice will no longer be the same situation in the world. Compared to the Su family who had no chance of winning back then, in the future, between the Su family and the Zhao family, at the very least, we will be evenly matched. The general trend is in our hands. The chess game between the two was already set. It was already dead. Su Fengyin took a deep breath and said bitterly, Lucio, I've disappointed you. Chu Lushan slowly lowered his head. Su Fengyin also lowered his head and didn't say anything, staring blankly at the chessboard. At some point, Su Fengnian was still sitting in his original spot. Chu Lushan had already stood up and walked over to Su Fengnian's side. With some difficulty, he bent down and reached out a hand to gently rub Su Fengnian's head. He said softly, "Although I'm very disappointed that I didn't hear the answer I wanted, Your Highness. You might have forgotten, but His Royal Highness, when you were young, out of all your adoptive sons, you were the closest to that silly Lucio. I, Lucio, have always been proud of this, happier than winning a battle. If there comes a day when Lucio, who has been alone since childhood, has to give up his 300 caddies of fat on the battlefield, don't be sad. If I, Chu Lushan, have a family in this life, then it's worth it." Chapter 14:27. Huta City was a nail that Bei Meng's army had to pull out when they went south. Huta City was huge and lofty. It was known as no other place in the border, no other place in the northwest. It was 4.5 li long from east to west and 5 li from north to south. Beiliang's road took 6 years to build. It was said that half of the dynasty's northwest was used up. Its south gate was called Ding Ding Gate, which was criticized by the civil officials of Liang. Just on the north side of the Tiger Head City, there were 12 winches and 12 crossbows, with 7 crossbows. The arrows were as big as the rafters of a house, with iron leaves as the feather. The arrows were as fast as thunder and could reach as far as 700 paces away. At the end of the spring and autumn period, when Gu Jiantang attacked the old southern Tang, he used these crossbows to shoot through the southern Tang Navy's large turreted ships to show the military power of Liang. If it wasn't for these giant ballistae intimidating and restraining them, if Northern Mang's infantry were allowed to wantonly push forward the siege weapons, Tiger Head City's defenses definitely wouldn't have had enough strength to spare. Using more than 1,000 stone catapult carts of various sizes to attack a single city, this was something only a madman would do. In history, this had only happened once during the middle stages of Great Feng Dynasty's decline. The city that suffered disaster at that time was precisely Great Feng Country's capital, whose scale wasn't inferior to Great Peace City. Of course, although Bei Meng's central line had the same number of catapults, the only difference was that the weight of the catapults was 20 to 30 jin more. Therefore, overall, the power of the catapults was far less than that of the attack in the middle of the Feng Dynasty. Huta City was easy to defend and hard to attack. It also had Liuya and Fuling to help restrain Bei Meng, so that Huta City wouldn't follow in the footsteps of Xianxia's 10 years lonely city. In addition, there were 6,000 cavalry in Huta City that could take the initiative to attack at any time. They could also coordinate with the elite cavalry of Liuya and Fuling. The defense line of Huayan Pass was also less than 100 li away from the front line of the 4 towns. All of them were elites of the Beiliang Frontier Army who dismounted to defend the city. If it wasn't for the fact that Northern Mang's central line of defense had sufficient military strength and possessed an absolute advantage in numbers, Northern Liang would have launched a large-scale cavalry battle at any moment. Therefore, in the spring of the second year of Xiangfu, Huta City became the only main character, attracting most of the attention from both sides of Liangmang. After the Beiliang Protectorate, or perhaps one should say Su Fengnian, personally decided to defend Huta City to the death for a year under the leadership of Deputy Administrator Song Dongming and Liangzhou Provincial Governor Tian Peifong, more than 10,000 infantrymen were sent to Liuya and Fuling, 2 towns within Liangzhou. Of these, 4,000 were youths from Liuzhou, carrying a large amount of equipment and supplies. They traveled north, and under the strict escort of the White Feather Guards personally led by Qi Danghua, they entered the 2 towns. For this reason, Bei Meng symbolically sent out 20,000 cavalrymen to bypass Huta City and try to intercept them. However, in the end, they didn't fight to the death with the White Feather Guards, and only 2 small-scale battles broke out. After this, Bei Meng should have guessed Beiliang's strategic intentions and increased the intensity of the attack on Huta City. Their siege techniques were mainly derived from the gourd mouth of Yuzhou. However, compared to the simple and crude attack on Huta City, Bei Meng attacked Huta City with a lot of new ideas. In addition to the catapults, the craftsmen of the southern dynasties also created a large number of toad carts for Beimang to fill up the trenches, and flying towers for archers to shoot from high altitudes and destroy the battlements on the city walls. They also tried to build a mountain near the city, and even sent cave masters to explore the terrain, digging tunnels day and night to collapse the city walls or to enter the city. For this reason, Huda City made all kinds of responses. Beimang's infantrymen were unafraid of death. They rushed forward, wrapped the soil with straw and branches, and threw it into the trenches. Huda City shot the red-hot iron balls into the trenches and into the crevices of the straw. In the end, the ashes and soil only increased by a few inches, which was far from Beimang's expectations. Huda City dug trenches inside the city walls and used fire to attack the trenches. Nearly 1,000 Beimang soldiers suffocated in the trenches and died miserably. Tiger Head City had long been prepared for the continuous assault of Northern Mang's 1,000 catapult carts. Lu Jinu's plan was meticulous and meticulous. He had long ordered people to prepare more than 400,000 earthen blanks, using them to reinforce the city walls before the battle. Even though they were not as sturdy as the original city walls made of rammed earth, they made the catapult carts that Northern Mang had originally used to obtain victory merely look like decorations. When Beimang used the stupidest method to turn the soil into a mountain outside Huda City, Lu Jinu used his own method to counter Beimang. He dug a tunnel to hollow out the foundation and sank thousands of Beimang's enemy soldiers. When a mountain collapsed and the earth cracked, dust flew everywhere. Even Huayang Pass Governor General House could see it. Even Chu Lushan, who rarely praised others, could not help but exclaim, "Lu Jinu is good at both offense and defense." As for the Northern Mang high-ranking officers who had suffered enough, towards this Northern Liang famous general whose reputation had long spread far and wide, everyone wanted to eat his flesh even more. After Liuya and Fuling each obtained 5,000 infantry to help defend the city, the light cavalry of the two towns could completely let loose. At the same time, Su Fengyan personally ordered the Xianli Ranch's horse farms in Inner Liangzhou to change or replenish warhorses for Liuya and Fuling, who originally needed to take care of long-distance raids. Instead, they had to focus on explosive power. Su Fengyan and the Governor-General House set a rule for Liuya and Fuling. The next battle was to be separated by 200 miles. As long as they found the right opportunity, they did not need to report to the Governor-General House and could go out of the city to find Beimang cavalry to fight. The only requirement was that they could preserve their main force after the battle, regardless of the outcome. This was an unbelievable military order for the Beiliang Frontier Army. There was actually such a good thing as not being punished after losing a battle. Fu Ling and Lu Ye even went to Huayang Pass to inquire about this matter, fearing that there was a mistake in the transmission of the news. However, the answer they received was positive. Afterwards, when the two cavalry generals met for a discussion, they were somewhat sullen and resentful. They felt that the prince and protector General Chu were looking down on the battle prowess of their two garrisons. The 4,000 Northern Mang cavalry were unable to fight to the death, fleeing towards the west. A cavalry officer called Qihilong Pass, the town commander of the advice army, Wei Liang, told him not to give chase. Wei Liang didn't listen to the advice, chasing after them for more than 30 li, setting up an ambush for the 8,000 Mang cavalry. At the final Qihilong Pass, at the most crucial moment, he led 500 cavalry to break through the enemy formation, directly charging into the Northern Mang's main banner. Moreover, he vowed to bring up the rear, buying precious time for the Fuling cavalry's main force to withdraw. Qihilong Pass armor had more than 6 arrows embedded in it, the 500 troops only having less than a single arrow left. In this battle, even though Northern Mang's losses were greater than Northern Liang's, the Fuling cavalry at Liangzhou's second line of defense was almost completely wiped out. Even though there were still 5,000 infantry defending the city, without the cavalry, one of the two wings of the defense line that were originally flying together would be broken. Because of this, Wei Liang went to Huayang Pass to offer a humble apology. However, Su Fengyin did not punish this Fu Ling general. He only promoted Qifyalong Pass, who he had casually thrown into the Fu Ling military town as a junior commandant, to the position of inspector general above commandant and below commandant. He would lead the 1,000 cavalry after the quota was filled and set up the Jianyin camp. He allowed this camp to increase the number of troops every time it achieved a merit. In the end, the maximum number of troops would be 3,000. This was another major event that attracted people's attention after the withdrawal of the Heluku Infantry Army's Hupong camp and the establishment of the Yuzhou Cavalry's no-retreat camp. Qifyalong Pass, a nobody from Beimang, began to amaze the Beiliang Frontier Army with a single brilliant feat inside the Beiliang Protectorate. Chu Lushan was discussing with the generals whether or not they should transport troops to Huda City. The two sides were arguing fiercely. The focus of the argument was whether or not the huge cost of opening up this road was meaningful. Now, everyone knew that Huda City could accommodate another 15,000 people. The real problem was whether or not they could get in. Luya and Fu Ling's cavalry could only temporarily prevent Beimang from launching a stable offensive in the south of Huda City. This was a world of difference from the Beiliang Frontier Army boldly supporting Huda City from the south gate. The insistent side believed that the cost of sending 15,000 people into Huda City would be the loss of about 10,000 cavalry. The opposing side insisted that this loss was underestimating Beimang's combat strength and determination. This kind of desperate action was exactly what they wanted. Beimang was worried about not being able to open up the situation. This was the northern barbarians dozing off, and Beiliang was sending them a pillow. When the time came, not to mention losing 10,000 cavalry, even 30,000 people would not be enough to fill up the big hole in the south of Huda City. Then, someone suggested that Fu Ling and Luya should attack at the same time. They should boldly push forward and harass Beimang's army stationed on the Longyan Plain. This would provide cover for the transportation of troops in the direction of Huayang Pass. But soon, someone objected. With the brains of Dong Zhuo and the others, this kind of seemingly well-intentioned but actually bad idea was no different from taking the initiative to greet the northern barbarians. They were afraid that they would not know that Beiliang had made a move. Chu Lushan, whose ears were filled with noise, said calmly, "With the reinforcement of Luya and Fu Ling, Beimang must have guessed that we want to use Huda City as a support point. Otherwise, they would not have set a trap for Fu Ling's cavalry a few days ago. Therefore, Beimang is now guessing when we will support Huda City, not if we will support Huda City. There's no doubt about this." When Chu Lushan opened his mouth to speak, the whole place immediately fell silent. Every one of the unruly generals of the border army naturally pricked up their ears to listen attentively. Chu Lushan continued in a neutral tone. "Then we will strive to find a time when they will not expect to do this. If there is no such opportunity, then we can only not do it. Everyone, Huda City must be defended. But don't forget why we are defending Huda City in the first place. We are defending Huda City not for the sake of defending, but to protect our line of defense in Liangzhou as much as possible. As for the matter of exchanging troops, it is meaningless even if one of our border army's lives is exchanged for 2 Beimang barbarians. Of course, during this period, we can take the opportunity to lure a few Beimang cavalry away from the main army. We can even directly place 15,000 soldiers behind Huayang Pass and not move. However, we can mobilize all the troops on the front line of the grave and launch a large-scale battle that Beimang will never expect. After winning, we can retreat." Chapter 1428. At this point, Chu Lushan tapped his own head with a finger and said with a fake smile, "Huda City has Lu Jinu. He will defend the city well. Everyone, other than our 2 legs, we still have the 4 legs of our war horses to help us run. Don't go down a single path. In the end, right now, we in the Northern Mang Army are just staring at each other in the area of Huda City and Huayang Pass. Both sides are scheming and scheming against each other, and the only thing left to do is to see whose Dao arts are more unexpected." Although there was no clear conclusion on the matter of Huda City's reinforcements, after Chu Lushan spoke, the generals present had no more objections. After that, Chu Lushan accompanied Su Fengyan for a stroll around the Governor-General manor. Chu Lushan sighed softly and said, "What a pity. We tried to be clever, but ended up making a fool of ourselves." Su Fengyan laughed softly and said, "Perhaps this is what they mean by man proposes, but God disposes. Just treat it as me shooting myself in the foot." Chu Lushan shook his head with a regretful expression. When Su Fengyan gave the military order to Liu Ya and Fuling, Wei Liang's rash pursuit and Bei Mang's ambush were all within the Governor-General Manor's expectations. In reality, once Wei Liang's cavalry fell into a desperate situation, they would only last for an hour at most before a long-distance Qingyuan cavalry would join the battle and wipe out Bei Mang's Bait cavalry and subsequent ambushes in one go. However, the sudden appearance of a small governor-general with a sense of danger and the courage to fight to the death destroyed all their plans. Su Fengyan and the Governor-General Manor had no choice but to suffer in silence. This kind of opportunity was like a lost opportunity. Bei Mang must have thought that Beiliang wouldn't repeat the same mistake and charge into the ambush. Beiliang also lost a great opportunity to set up a trap for Bei Mang. Chu Lushan suddenly laughed. The Ministry of War in the capital finally remembered to ask us about Bei Mang's attack. Su Fengyan sneered. "Just ignore them. If those guys at the border of the Ministry of War dared to go to Gourdmouth of Yuzhou Province or come to Huayan Pass, I wouldn't stop them from watching the battle. Now that they've F***ed off, there's no such thing as lying down and enjoying a good life." Chu Lushan nodded, taking a bit of joy in his misfortune. That mad dog Yuan is now in a difficult situation. Wang Jingchong and Great Ru Shiwei, these two generals, have given him a great victory with both hands. Right now, the entire court is looking down on Northern Mang's military strength with disdain. Yuan Tingshan has also become Ji Province's general as he wished. I reckon that Gu Jiantang really wants to hack this son-in-law who only cares about his own promotion to death. The more vulnerable Northern Mang's easternmost battlefront is, the more difficult it will be for our great General Gu to obtain money, provisions, and weapons from the Ministry of Revenue and Ministry of War. When the two Liao brothers said that they wanted to build a 6,000-man Modeo infantry formation, the Minister of Revenue didn't say anything, but the Assistant Minister gave a straightforward answer. "I have a life, but I don't have any money." Su Fengyan sighed, looking back now. When Yuan Guo was promoted from the Ministry of Rights to the Ministry of Revenue, which was in charge of the imperial court's purse, it seemed that he was favored by the emperor, but in fact he was not. Zhao Zhuan's real trusted subordinates were the Ministry of Rights, followed by the Ministry of Personnel and the Ministry of War. The Ministry of Revenue was only slightly higher than the Ministry of Punishments and the Ministry of Works. When it rains, it pours. Later, Yuan Guo made another mistake when he stood on the side in the small imperial court meeting. The only suspense was whether he or Liu Baijia of the Ministry of War would leave the 6 ministries earlier. Chu Lushan sneered. In the end, it's because the new emperor doesn't trust Gu Lu's disciples from the bottom of his heart. When he changed the Liang edition, he was testing Yuan Guo and the others. Isn't there a rumor that he's going to set up Jidushi deputy governors in the vassal territories? I reckon that Liu Baijia and Yuan Guo will both have to get out of Taiyan City. One will go to Nanjiang to discuss the king of Yin, and the other will go to a newly established vassal. Su Fengyan nodded. There will definitely be someone in Nanjiang. Most likely, it will be Tangshi Sword Immortal, who disappointed Zhao Zhuan greatly and didn't see him as one of his own. Yuan Guo will be relatively better. He will probably go to the king of Han, who has always been at odds with Zhao Zhuan. If his performance is good, Yuan Guo will have a chance to return to the center of the imperial court. Liu Baijia, on the other hand, will definitely have the fate of moving around in the local areas for the rest of his life. Moreover, without the Minister of War, there is bound to be a series of promotions and changes. The imperial court will also be able to appease some of the local generals, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. After all, the posthumous title is only given after death, but the official position in the Ministry of War is real. Chu Lushan sneered. Apart from the chaos in the imperial court when the Zhao family of Liang was in a remote corner, there hasn't been such a dazzling upheaval in many years. Su Fengyin shook his head and said, "Actually, it's not quite the same. The chaos now is only seen as a mess by the common people. In fact, there is order amidst the chaos. The officials in the capital all know what to do." Chu Lushan nodded and said, "That's why Qi Yanglong still has some skills. No wonder he's the old guy that Zhao Dun used to replace by Yin." Su Fengyin chuckled softly and said, "Zhao Zhuan is willing to put Tantanon in an important position. This proves that this young emperor who is busy using his but to warm up the dragon throne hasn't lost his mind." Chu Lushan and Su Fengyin had unwittingly walked to the corridor of the Yamen where Yu Luandao had once worked. The two of them stood under the eaves, one with his fingers crossed and the other with his hands tucked into his sleeves. These two most important figures in Bailiang standing side by side like this looked rather comical. Chu Lushan gently exhaled and watched the mist slowly dissipate in front of his eyes. He said, "The Yuzhou cavalry has produced Yu Luandao, and Xiaoguang City has produced Lu Haojian, who has repeatedly performed meritorious deeds. Now, Liangzhou at least has a Chifu Dragon Pass. This is a good thing. I'm just waiting to see which of the 100,000 refugees in Liuzhou will emerge first. And that Hong, you seems to be pretty good. His temperament is a bit like Huang Fuxi's. This kind of person is born for chaotic times." Su Fengyin helplessly said, "Beimeng also has people like Zhong Tan. In the future, they will also gradually surface in the general trend." Chu Lushan was just about to speak when a commandant of the White Horse Guard suddenly strode into the courtyard, his expression somewhat strange. He cupped his fists and said, "Your Highness, Protector General, there's someone requesting an audience. He claims to be Guangling Circuit's Ko Jianghuai." Even Su Fengyin and Chu Lushan couldn't help but look at each other in dismay. What kind of play was this? Chu Lushan smiled and asked, "Are we going to welcome him with open arms? Or are we going to ignore this famous general of West Chu?" Su Fengyin said to the White Horse Guard, "Bring him over." Very quickly, a tall and sturdy young man appeared in their field of vision. This also seemed to be tantamount to brazenly barging into the field of vision of the entire Bailiang frontier army. Ko Jianghuai, who had entered Bailiang Circuit alone, didn't carry a sword or saber. He also didn't have the scholarly air of a scholar, and he wasn't even as refined as many scholars who traveled to Liangliang. Instead, he seemed more like a local scholar of Bailiang. He looked like the kind of person who had read the sages and could ride a horse to kill enemies. Ko Jianghuai shot a glance at the Protector General, who was indeed difficult to not notice. Then he stared at Su Fengyin and got straight to the point. "Su Fengyin, Ko Jianghuai, can serve Bailiang, but I have a condition. If there comes a day when I have to bring 10,000 Bailiang cavalry to Guangling Circuit, you don't have to worry about what I have to do. Ko Jianghuai is confident that I can match up to 10,000 cavalry." Chu Lushan laughed and said, "Even those courtesans in the brothels raise their own statuses, but they aren't as thick-skinned as you, Ko Jianghuai. If you, Ko Jianghuai, were at Guangling Circuit, I would be able to accept 20 or 30,000 cavalry, let alone 10,000. But here, where do you get the confidence to be worth 10,000 Bailiang cavalry? What, is it from fighting Zhao, Yi, and Songli? Is it because of the outstanding fighting strength of their cavalry? Are they worthy of carrying the shoes of my Bailiang cavalry?" Ko Jianghuai's face was ashen. He was still staring at the northwestern vassal king, who was younger than him. Su Fengyin shook his head and said, "If you want to use the Bailiang cavalry to break the situation, I won't agree." Ko Jianghuai had a mocking smile on his face. "I didn't expect that the most powerful vassal king in the Liang dynasty would only have this much courage. You, Su Fengyin, don't know that the more Guangling Circuit makes the Liang imperial court suffer, the more the Zhao dynasty will rely on your northwestern Su family. When the time comes, as long as you, Su Fengyin, are willing to lend me some troops, let's see if the imperial court will dare to use the two issues of censorship and transportation to make things difficult for Bailiang. To say the least, even if I borrow troops, I won't openly use the Bailiang cavalry's banner. To say the least, wouldn't it be more advantageous for Bailiang to change the imperial surname from Zhao to Jiang? Whether it's the princess, Chao, Chongqing, or me, Ko Jianghuai, we're all destined not to be the Zhao dynasty of Liang. Not only will we not be a burden to Bailiang, Su Fengyin said calmly, to be honest, I've thought about this in private when I was bored. I'll grit my teeth and give you 20 to 30,000 cavalry, and you'll take down the Guangling circuit. But if you want to help West Shu fight for the world, not to mention 20 to 30,000, even 50,000 or 100,000 would be a drop in the bucket. Do you really think that Western Shu's Chen Jibao and Liao's Gu Jiantang are just two wooden stakes? Do you really think that the hundreds of thousands of elite border troops in Nanjiang are just there to watch a play? When the time comes, don't even talk about waiting for your Jiang surname to become the emperor and then fully supporting the Northwest. I'm afraid that Beimang would already be marching south. Ko Jianghuai, you said that my vision is not big, and I don't deny it. But your vision is even smaller. Su Fengyin held back his laughter and said, moreover, your clumsy persuasion, especially this method of not giving up until you've shocked people to death, really isn't very clever. When I, Su Fengyin, roamed Jianghu in the past, I pretended to be a fortune teller and pretended to be a ghost. Every time, I could at least swindle some copper coins. As for you, don't even talk about 10,000 cavalry. You can't even bring one out of Bailiang. Chu Lushan laughed uncontrollably. Ko Jianghuai didn't show any anger from embarrassment. On the contrary, he looked somewhat regretful and relieved. This young man stood silently in the courtyard, appearing somewhat lonely and bleak. Su Fengyin walked down the steps and asked, do you know why Chao Chongqing didn't let you lead the troops? Ko Jianghuai said in an indifferent tone, he felt that I was only a talented general, not a talented commander. He felt that I should be able to see the distant Tai and city and not the gains and losses of the Guangling circuit. This time, it was Su Fengyin's turn to be surprised. He asked curiously, then what were you thinking? Chapter 1429. Ko Jianghuai calmly replied, I only know one thing. With the strength of Westshu itself. So what if we attack Grand Peace City? Chu Lushan clicked his tongue in wonder. Kid, you're not stupid either. It's just that compared to the cautious and conscientious Xie Bian, your Ko Jianghuai's appetite is even bigger. Ko Jianghuai gazed at this small mountain and asked back, as a general, between the Su Shao who suffered defeat after defeat, and the Yi Bai Kuei who won every battle and was only defeated once in his life. Who would you choose? Chu Lushan nodded. That makes sense. Ko Jianghuai laughed self-deprecatingly, and then he turned around and left. Su Fengyin did not make a sound even after he had left the courtyard. Chu Lushan whispered, Are we really going to let this flood dragon slip away? Su Fengyin softly replied, Compared to Ko Jianghuai, I still admire the hard-working Xie Bian more. Chu Lushan grunted in agreement. Xie Bian is easy to use, but it's hard to say about Ko Jianghuai. Su Fengyin suddenly yelled, Ko Jianghuai, come in. You're walking so slowly out of the courtyard. Who are you trying to impress? Ko Jianghuai really did turn around and appear at the entrance to the courtyard. Su Fengyin laughed and said, How many Bailiang cavalry you can take away will depend on your own ability. Starting from today, not only Huayang Pass, but also the cavalry in Liuya and Fuling towns will be under your command. Excluding Bailiang's losses, however many Beimang soldiers you can kill, I'll give you any cavalry other than the Great Snow Dragon cavalry, and 2 groups of heavy cavalry. But let me say this first. Those cavalry troops are not for you to use to attack Tyne City. They are just helping you to preserve some of West Shu's vitality. Then you have to bring everyone back here. In fact, you and I both know that Guangling Road is not suitable for you, Ko Jianghuai. Bailiang is just right for you. Do you want to make this deal? Ko Jianghuai's expression was uncertain. Su Fengyin pointed at him and said, All right. It's just a cheap trick. I, Su Fengyin, am also your senior. You, Ko Jianghuai, have been planning for this since the beginning. I didn't try to bargain with you, so you should be content. Ko Jianghuai laughed. I'm not good at acting, but you, Su Fengyin, shouldn't take advantage of us for granted. Once West Chu is defeated, it's over. Can you really abandon our princess and not save her? Won't you still have to lead your troops to rescue her? I'm just helping you find a way out. Su Fengyan nodded seriously and said, Well, it seems like neither of us are good people. Chu Lushan looked at the sudden turn of events and was somewhat speechless. Young people these days, Ko Jianghuai, who was covered in dust, said indifferently, Is there a place to sleep? I'll sleep for a day and a night first. As for leading troops to kill Beimang barbarians, I'll talk about it after I've had enough sleep. Chu Lushan laughed and scolded, You're the boss. After Ko Jianghuai was led away, Su Fengyan looked up at the gray sky and fell into deep thought. After walking down the steps, Chu Lushan did not say anything to disturb him. He stood quietly to the side and closed his eyes to rest. After a long while, Su Fengyan said slowly, Even if Ko Jianghuai uses an alias, it's still hard to say what the pros and cons will be in the future. Chu Lushan was somewhat puzzled. We don't have to worry about the imperial court. The current situation is pretty much the worst. One Ko Jianghuai can fight against 10,000 cavalry. Actually, that kid isn't bragging. There's Zhou Kong and great ancestor Gu overseeing the front line at Qinghetung, so there's nothing to worry about. But if there really is a big battle at Huayang Pass, Huang Laifu and the others won't be able to handle it, so I'll have to personally take the field. With Ko Jianghuai, we'll have a much easier time. Why do you say that? Su Fengyan said bitterly. Maybe I'm thinking too far ahead. Chu Lushan quickly understood and sighed. It's a bit far, but distant water can't quench a present thirst. Su Fengyan nodded and laughed. That's true. Let's use Ko Jianghuai to deal with the urgent situation first. Chu Lushan hesitated. Su Fengyan patted his shoulder and walked out of the courtyard. Chu Lushan stood in place and muttered to himself. Is it because he's afraid that I, Chu Lushan, will really throw 300 caddies of meat onto the battlefield that he agreed to let Ko Jianghuai stay behind? Qingming Festival was approaching. At this time of year, there was no rain in Beiyang. The morale of Beiyang Road was also stabilizing. Liangzhou's Huda City was as stable as Mount Tai, and Xiaowang City, which was on the verge of collapse, was also defended. The youths of Liuzhou entered the border army one after another, and a general with the surname Ko suddenly appeared above the heads of the two towns of Liuya and Fuling. In name, he was the deputy general of Liangzhou. With Liuzhou's languishing lawn saber's illustrious military exploits, Liangzhou's border army was not surprised by this. This also indirectly proved that the young king's control over Beiyang's military and politics was growing. This was definitely not something he could do just because his surname was Su. The Qingming Festival was a festival that occurred between the middle of spring and late spring. It was a time when the qi was clear and the scenery was bright, and all things were visible, hence its name. In previous years, Beiyang and the Central Plains had more or less the same customs. Other than the tradition of sweeping the tombs and offering sacrifices to the ancestors, there were also night lanterns, praying for blessings, and planting willows to ward off evil spirits. However, this year, Beiyang Road's various provincial and county officials had specifically ordered that planting willows was not allowed, and no explanation was given. Qingming Festival was one of the ghost festivals, and it was also the time when willows sprouted and turned green. As a result, the saying, when a willow branch grows on the door, 100 ghosts will not enter the house, was very popular. It was just that many of the troublemakers in Beiyang had already left the country, or they had been dealt with until they were docile and obedient. Thus, there was no disturbance or objection to this kind of small matter. In the second year of the auspicious talisman, Liangzhou was bright and clear without rain, and the weather was mild and excellent. However, there was a kind of speechless solemnity in the provincial capital where Mount Qingliang of Liangzhou was located. There were constantly important people rushing into the city with their personal cavalry. Other than the head of the Beiyang Protectorate, Chu Lushan, who stayed at Huayang Pass, the commander of the cavalry, Yuan Zuozong, who did not go down south, and the commander of the infantry, Yin Wenluan, who oversaw the border of Yuzhou, The other generals at the border almost all rushed to this provincial capital without exception. Zhou Kong, great ancestor Gu, He Zhonghu, Chen Yunshui, Yuzhou provincial governor Hu Kuei, Yuzhou general Huang Fuqiu, and even the administrator Li Gongda and Lingzhou provincial governor Su Beiji all arrived one after another. This was the first time that Mount Qingliang's royal residence had gathered so many generals after Su Fengyan was overthrown as the king of Beiliang. It was an unprecedented grand occasion. The next day was the Qingming festival. 2 riders from a northern border of Liangzhou quietly entered the city under the curtain of night. After entering through the southern city gate, they followed the main street and headed north, heading straight for the legendary Beiliang Palace of the Liang Court. The deputy general of Liangzhou, Ko Jianghuai, who used the alias of Ko Beishang, slowly rode his horse. He turned his head and smiled at Su Fengyan. Are there still people going to the royal residence to assassinate you? There shouldn't be. One of the 4 great grandmasters of the world, Su Fengyan. Regardless of whether he is the king of Beiliang or not, no one dares to seek trouble. Su Fengyan dismissed it with a smile. Chapter 1430. After getting to know this Ko Jianghuai, Su Fengyan realized that despite this guy's cold and unapproachable appearance, he was actually a chatterbox. Once he started talking, he couldn't stop talking. During their journey together, Ko Jianghuai asked almost everything about Su Fengyan's first trip to Jianghu. On the other hand, Ko Jianghuai never took the initiative to ask about Beiliang's military affairs. Occasionally, when he talked about Guangling's military affairs, which could affect the hearts of the people, he always had a sloppy attitude. This was an eye-opener for Su Fengyan. It turned out that there was such a kind of general between the unparalleled valiant general who could break through enemy lines and the scholarly general who only had a feather fan and a silk headscarf. Ko Jianghuai, who had been practicing the sword, had seen that Su Fengyan had not only traveled Jianghu with Li Chungang, but had also interacted with Dong Tai. He wanted nothing more than for Su Fengyan to know clearly what the 2 sword gods liked to wear and what they ate. Therefore, when Su Fengyan told him the truth about the old man wearing a sheepskin fur coat who liked to pick his feet and dig his ears, Ko Jianghuai, who had collapsed on the spot, was silent for about half a day. With great difficulty, he pulled himself together and rambled. So that's the style of an expert. Not wallowing in the mire with the world. No wonder he could practice the world's best sword. It seems like I also have to wear a tattered fur coat. In the end, when Su Fengyan also said that the peach blossom sword god's appearance was not at all like jade, and that he was actually more approachable than Ko Jianghuai, Ko Jianghuai fell silent again. When Ko Jianghuai had finally finished healing his injuries, Su Fengyan said that he had only practiced martial arts for 3 or 4 years, and that he had relied on luck to become a great grandmaster. This made Ko Jianghuai, whose swordsmanship was actually quite good, grief-stricken, and completely shut his mouth. When they entered Liangzhou city, Ko Jianghuai finally came back to his senses. When they could vaguely see the lights of Mount Qingliang, Ko Jianghuai suddenly said, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders, "Although you deliberately made it sound easy, I know that it was not easy for you to have your current glory." Su Fengyan smiled indifferently and said, "If this can make you feel better, then you can understand it that way. Let me make a rough calculation. Since I started practicing the saber in Wudong, I started from level 2 Master Realm to the Celestial Realm, which is above the Earth Immortal Realm. If I really count, there's 6 realms. It seems that I broke through more than once a year. All right, you're still a master and not of Vajra Realm. If you're lucky, 4 to 5 years later, you might be the top expert in the world." Thus, Ko Jianghuai stopped talking. When this Liangzhou deputy general entered the majestic palace, he was still sickly. 2 young tiger Kuei excitedly ran over to welcome Su Fengyan. The one nicknamed Vajra directly jumped into Su Fengyan's arms. The older sister, Bodhisattva, also intimately bit Su Fengyan's robe. Then, Su Fengyan left Ko Jianghuai at Tidehark Lake and took the 2 happy young tiger Kuei to Wutangan. The second sister, Su Weisheng, and Lu Qingyan were naturally there. They were busy with the young women who had the reputation of female Hanlin. The second sister only looked up at Su Fengyin and then lowered her head. Su Fengyin walked to Lu Qingyin's desk. What surprised him was that Wang Chudong also had a place in Wutongyan. Her desk was right next to Lu Qingyin's. She seemed to be writing a collection of Bailiang heroes that was destined to not be noticed by the literary circle of Liang. When Su Fengyin moved a chair to sit between them, the little girl was still in a daze. Her serious and playful look made Su Fengyin and Lu Qingyin look at each other and smile. Not far away, Su Weisheng finished writing a spy report. She put down her pen, rubbed her wrist, and said softly, "Lu Su will enter the capital in a few days. You should have let me Feng Jie and Fan Xiaochai kidnap him and bring him to Mount Qingliang. That way, Deputy Administrator Song would have an easier time." Su Fengyin raised his hands and begged for mercy. "Didn't I kidnap Ko Jianghuai back? It could be considered as making up for my mistakes." Su Weisheng glared at him. Ko Jianghuai didn't come to Bailiang because it was forbidden. However, if Lu Su, who helped Zhao Sun present the plan, came to Tian City and was used by Zhao Zhuan, it would harm Bailiang. It's a loss. How can you confuse the two? Su Fengyin's face was bitter, but he didn't dare to refute. Lu Qingyin also didn't help him out with words. She just smiled at him. That great writer Wang Dongxiang, who was slow to realize that Su Fengyin was sitting very close to him, was so frightened that he leaned back and fell back with his chair. Su Fengyin gently reached out and pulled the chair back to its original position. Wang Chudong, who had made a fool of himself, was ashamed and seemed to want to find a place to hide, like a panicked little fox. Su Fengyin made a face at her. She immediately smiled brightly. Her eyes narrowed into crescents and her cheeks dimpled. Su Fengyin said with a smile, "Don't be too tired. Remember to strike a balance between work and rest. You can also practice the Wudong Mountain Fist technique when you have time." Su Weisheng said unhappily, "Don't just stand there and talk." Su Fengyin carefully rolled his eyes at Lu Qingyin and Wang Chudong. The Wutongyan maids at the table couldn't help but secretly laugh. Su Weisheng was about to continue lecturing when Su Fengyin hurriedly stood up and said, "I'll go to Teacher Song's place to take a look." Looking at the king of Bailiang, who ran away with the two tiger kuei, the atmosphere in Wutongyan unconsciously relaxed a lot. Su Fengyin's treatment at Song Dongming's place and Wutongyan's side was of course like heaven and earth. Now, the officials who served as the subordinates of the deputy administrator were mostly outstanding young scholars in Bailiang. They each had their own strengths. However, compared to the younger generation of Jianghu, who worshipped and envied Su Fengyin's identity as a great master, these scholars were more in awe of Su Fengyin, the leader of 300,000 iron cavalry, after in-depth understanding of the current situation in Bailiang. Therefore, when Su Fengyin and Song Dongming, who was taking a break from the busy drinking tea, these young people were all paying attention to the young king's every move. Song Dongming held the teacup that Su Fengyin had personally brewed and poured tea for him. He was not in a hurry to drink tea. He was only using it to get rid of the spring chill. He said softly, "All the scholars who went to Liang have arrived. The family members of the soldiers who died in battle have also arrived. There are certainly some rumors among them. I hope you don't take it to heart." Su Fengyin nodded. Some of the rumors were the same as many people who heard that he had gone outside the Calabash Gate and felt that he was showing off his bravery. Su Fengyin really did not want to pay attention to them. Some of them were extremely bitter and sobbing. Su Fengyin did not dare to listen to these. After chatting about Bailiang's government affairs, Song Dongming stood up and walked out of the room with Su Fengyin. This middle-aged man, who was once groomed by Yuan Bunshi, as the prime minister hesitated and said, "In the past, I wanted to be the administrator so that it would be easier for me to show off my skills. After getting along with Li Gongda, I feel that I still hope that he can continue to be the administrator. I am in Liangzhou, and Sir Li is in Lingzhou. It won't be a problem." Su Fengyin nodded and said, "Since Sir Song has said so, then there is no problem." Song Dongming stopped and said with a smile, "I still have a lot of business to take care of. I won't see you off." Su Fengyin smiled and said, "Of course." Song Dongming said to Su Fengyin's back, In the past, I only knew that Bailiang was a place where martial artists use soldiers. Now, Song Dongming and many scholars have discovered that Bailiang is also a place where scholars can write. I want to thank you on behalf of these people. Su Fingyin turned his head and smiled happily. Song Dongming suddenly blinked and tried hard to hold back his smile. He said, "Your Highness, there are a few women of the younger generation in the Song family. They're all virtuous and have written to me. They said that even if they steal, they want me to send back a few small items such as your seals and copybooks. The most courageous one has always wanted to travel to Jianghu and be a heroine since she was young. She said that it would be best if I sent her a piece of your clothing. If I didn't send anything back, she would cut ties with me, her uncle." Su Fingyin rubbed his forehead awkwardly. Song Dongming laughed heartily and said, "I don't care about the clothing. Your Highness can just casually write 4 or 5 characters and send me a few copybooks." On the night before Qingming Festival, Su Fingyin sat alone on the top of the mountain. He watched the city lights at the foot of the mountain gradually light up and then extinguish. He finished a jug of green ant wine. Chapter 1431. At dawn, Su Beiji slowly walked to the top of the mountain. He looked at Su Fingyin, who was draped in a thick fur coat. He walked to the stone table and sat down. He shook the empty wine pot and said softly, "An ordinary man will die because of his treasures, and 100 ghosts will look up at him." Su Fingyin, whose alcohol smell had long been blown away by the cold mountain wind, sighed and said, "Last night, I was thinking that if someone else becomes the emperor, even if that person used to be my good friend, would he tolerate someone with a different surname holding hundreds of thousands of elite soldiers?" Su Beiji shook his head and said, "You'd better not have any hope, or else you'll be disappointed. Because even if that person can tolerate it, the people around him won't agree. How to sit on the dragon throne and how to sit on it are 2 completely different things." Bailiang always felt that the 3 emperors of the Zhao clan of Liang were the same. They all liked to cook the hound after the cunning rabbit had outlived its usefulness. This opinion wasn't wrong. However, not to mention Zhao Zhuan, who had just ascended the throne, Zhao Yin and Zhao Dun were destined to be wise monarchs in the history books of future generations. They naturally had their own strengths. Ordinary commoners would have to rack their brains if they wanted to take care of a household and live a comfortable life, let alone a huge dynasty. Zhao Yin might believe that Su Xiao won't rebel against the Zhao clan, but Zhao Yin wouldn't believe that Su Zhao's son would willingly guard the Northwest. Zhao Dun might know that your bottom line isn't low, but he also doesn't believe that the next Su clan's prince with a different surname won't be arrogant and uncontrollable. He must be wondering if there's a possibility that the king of Bailiang might one day run off to destroy the Zhao clan on a whim. The outspoken Su Beiji glanced at Su Fingyin, who wanted to say something but was hesitating. He sneered and said, "You might say that Su Xiao won't rebel, but I, Su Fingyin, won't rebel either. The same goes for my descendants in the future." Su Fingyin smiled bitterly and said nothing. Su Beiji's words were still harsh. There's no knowing what's in a person's heart. No one can read Su Fingyin's mind. No one in the world has to believe anyone's reason, especially those who were born in the royal family. If they weren't suspicious by nature, how could they sit on the throne? How could he compete with the vassal towns, the relatives of the emperor, the eunuchs, and the civil and military officials of the imperial court? Besides, he would rather have his grandson squander away his family business than let it be snatched away by an outsider. This kind of dark mentality was not unique to the emperor. Do you, Su Fingyin, dare to say that you don't have any? Su Fingyin smiled and said, "That's true." Su Beiji suddenly asked, "Aren't you one of the 4 grandmasters? Why? Are you also afraid of the cold?" Su Fingyin said self-deprecatingly, "After the battle at Liuzhou, my strength fell greatly, and I feel cold in my bones all day long. Actually, the fur coat can't keep out the cold. The only reason I wear it is because it's better than nothing. It's just like how many retired swordsmen of the Jianghu like to look at their dusty swords on the shelves. Retired generals also like to touch their armor and sabers." Su Beiji asked, "What's up with that Liangzhou Deputy General Ko Beishang?" Su Fengyin joked, He's a new lover. What's up, Tangerine? Is this old lover of yours here to denounce you? Su Beiji stared expressionlessly at Su Fengyan. Su Fengyan could only put away his joking expression and said helplessly, "It's that Ko Jianghuai from West Chu from Guangling Path. He made a deal with me, and we're both getting what we need." Su Beiji's expression softened, and he said in a low voice, "Liuzhou only has 3 incomplete military towns to rely on, but they have to face Lu Gui's 100,000 soldiers and Tuoba Bodhisattva's 10,000 elites. They have 30,000 long Xiang armies, 2 deputies. Wang Lingbao is only a valiant general. Although Li Mofen is a talented general, there's a huge disparity in strength between the 2 sides at Liangmong in Liuzhou. Li Mofen is also not an immortal who can make soldiers out of beans. The Longxiang army is still in a perilous situation, and we need Ko Jianghuai, who has the potential to be a top general of the spring and autumn period, to help us in our hour of need." Su Fengyan nodded and said, "When Ko Jianghuai makes a name for himself at the Huaiyang Pass defense line in Fuling, Liuya, and Huaiyang Pass, I also have plans to let him become a general there. In the northern pass of Yangzhou, the space for us and Beimang to maneuver our troops is limited. In the end, it's just a fight to the death. Therefore, we have to defend multiple passes and garrison troops, and both sides have their hands tied. However, Liuzhou is like a blank piece of paper. It has plenty of blank space for Ko Jianghuai to display his military talents to the fullest." Su Fengyan suddenly laughed and asked, "Zhu Zi, you're actually afraid that something will happen to Qin Shiliang in Qingsong City, right?" Su Beiji asked back, "Do I have to scheme against my colleagues every day for you, the king of Beimang, to feel at ease?" Su Fengyan slammed the table and glared at her. "Zhu Zi, you can't vent your anger on me just because you were bullied in Lingzhou and scolded by others, okay? Let's talk nicely, okay?" Ko Jianghuai, who was casually strolling around Mount Qingliang, coincidentally saw this scene and heard these words. For some reason, he felt a chill run down his spine. Could it be that Su Beiji had an affair with that Su Beiji? Otherwise, how could a provincial governor without any foundation make the king of Beimang feel so wronged? Ko Jianghuai quickly turned around and was about to retreat. However, he was stopped by Su Fengyan. Then, the 3 of them surrounded the stone table and formed a tripartite formation. Ko Jianghuai's expression was as if he was deaf, blind, or mute just because they were flirting. Su Fengyan looked at Ko Jianghuai, who was pretending not to look. He pointed at Su Beiji and introduced him with a smile. Lingzhou Provincial Governor Su Beiji, praised by Mr. Song Dongming as the kind of person who can slaughter commoners and stabilize the country. Unfortunately, his alcohol tolerance is poor, and his alcohol tolerance is even worse. Once, when he was drinking with the Fish Dragon Gang in Lingzhou, I had to personally carry him back. Ko Jianghuai said seriously, "Greetings, Provincial Governor Su." Su Beiji also regained his usual elegance and said with a smile, "General Ko's arrival in the Beiliang Frontier Army is like adding wings to a tiger." Su Fengyan said mischievously, "Aren't you helping the tiger do evil?" Su Beiji laughed coldly. "Oh, impressive, scolding all 3 of them at once. You don't even let yourself off." Ko Jianghuai also said seriously, "You hurt yourself by hurting 1,000 of your enemies." It can be seen that the king of Beimang is very lousy at using troops. Chapter 1432. Su Fengyan said proudly, "Just by talking, he can destroy Ko Jianghuai and Su Beiji together. How is he not qualified? If we fight, why don't we give it a try?" At this time, a large group of people who had just reached the summit of Mount Qingliang began to jeer. "Give it a try. You must give it a try. General Ko, I have high hopes for you. If you win this battle, you'll be one of the few great grandmasters in the world. Not to mention Liangzhou's deputy general. You'll even be Liangzhou's general. If you still think your position is too low, Chen Yunshui, will give you the position of deputy general of the infantry. General Ko, we've been unhappy with His Highness for a long time. We're old, so even if we win, it's an unfair victory. Today, You're the same age as His Highness, so you must help us vent our anger. If worst comes to worst, He Zhonghu, will personally carry you down the mountain." Turning his head to look at this large group of Bailiang's most powerful officials, Ko Jianghuai, who had just arrived in Bailiang, felt his mouth twitch. For a moment, he was not used to it. In Guangling Dao, whether it was in his early years at Xianxia Academy or later at a Chu's court, there would never be a scene like this where old men ganged up to trick a young junior. While he felt that it was ridiculous and funny, Ko Jianghuai also felt an irrepressible emotion in his heart. Perhaps it could be described as intense passion. Among these old men, there was the #1 general of the old Southern Tang, Ancestor Gu, the Partridge Zhou Kong, He Zhonghu, who had defeated 40,000 later Sui infantry with 8,000 cavalry, and Xianxia, who always put on his armor and charged into battle. Behind the 4 deputy commanders of the Bailiang Frontier Army were the Administrator Li Gongda and the Deputy Administrator Song Dongming, dressed in civil official robes, and Huang Shang, who had the reputation of being the conscience of the Lianyang imperial censor. Other than them, Ko Jianghuai recognized the Liangzhou provincial governor Tian Peifeng, the Yuzhou provincial governor Hu Kuei, the Yuzhou provincial governor Hu Kuei, the Lingzhou deputy general Han Laozhan, and the others, based on their official robes and decorations. It was a pity that Ko Jianghuai never got to see the commander of the Bailiang cavalry, White Bear Yuan Zuozong, or the infantry commander, Yanwen Luan. Of course, he didn't get to see the Yu family's proudest weapon, Yuan Dao. Ko Jianghuai couldn't help but feel some regret. One had to know that when Ko Jianghuai was studying at the Xianxia Academy, he had spent countless nights reading through great ancestor Gu's theory of war and deducing the classic battles created by Zhou Kong, He Zhonghu, Qin Yunshui, and the others. It was soul-stirring, enough to go with wine. Ko Jianghuai saw that there were 20 to 30 generals standing behind them. Most of them were relatively young, around 34 years old. They should be the high-ranking military officers with real power after Bailiang's reform. For some reason, Ko Jianghuai couldn't help but stand up and salute these people with cupped fists. He Zhonghu was the first to return the salute. After that, everyone else also smiled and cupped their fists. Ko Jianghuai inadvertently discovered that even a scholar like Tian Peifeng didn't hesitate when he cupped his fists with the generals. Then, everyone went up the building and looked down at the city. As time passed, they gradually dispersed. By noon, only Su Fengyan, Su Beiji, and Ko Jianghuai were left, as well as the 2 young Tiger Kuei that were jumping around Su Fengyan. In the end, Su Beiji also went out of the building to Song Dongming's half-waist official residence to discuss matters. Ko Jianghuai, who had nothing to do, also followed him down the mountain and went to the tide-listening pavilion to enjoy the scenery. Su Fengyan was waiting for a group of people in the building. There were 5 of them, Su Yambing, a family of 3, and a Beimang youth. Su Fengyan looked at the Beimang martial grandmaster, who already looked like a commoner from Liang. His expression was complicated, and he said, "It really is you." It was the middle-aged man from Huyin Temple. He grinned and didn't say anything. His daughter, on the other hand, opened her eyes wide and stared hard at Su Fengyan, the young master she had appointed as her master. She raised her little head and stared at him for a long time, seemingly disappointed. She sighed like an old man and muttered, "So he's just like my father. He doesn't seem very powerful." Su Yambing said calmly, "We fought twice, and there was no clear victor. For the last battle, neither he nor I were in a hurry." Su Fengyan felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He smiled and said, "There's no need to be in a hurry." Su Fengyan looked at Taimu Dai who was often mentioned in the spies of the Fu Shui chamber. He looked at the ordinary sword at his waist and said with a Beimang accent, "Good sword." Taimu Dai thought it was just a polite remark and only nodded with a cold face. However, this young man's expression was still somewhat uneasy. After all, this vassal king with the strongest military force in the Liang dynasty was not only the mortal enemy of Beimang, but also the martial grandmaster who had defeated Wang Xianji of Wuwu City. In the corridor outside the building, Huyin Temple supported his daughter and let her stand on a railing. When Su Fengyan saw a figure, he He said goodbye and went downstairs. Su Weisheng sat in his wheelchair and glanced at the people upstairs. He said softly, 10 days ago, Shishu sent a message to Wutangan asking you to go to the border of Lingzhou. I ignored it. Su Fengyan frowned and said, he wants to see me? Su Weisheng said calmly, right now. Xie Gaining and the girl from the Spring Invitation Cottage have entered Lingzhou. He said he will wait for you at the border between Lingzhou and Liangzhou. Su Fengyan smiled and said, then let's meet. Su Weisheng nodded and said, bring Uncle Su and Tantai Pingjing. If Huyan Temple is willing to go with us, that would be the best. Su Fengyan nodded and said, During the Qingming festival of the second year of Xiangfu, at dusk, tens of thousands of people were dressed in mourning clothes at the back of Mount Qingliang. The king of Beiliang, Su Fengyan, led nearly 100 civil and military officials and offered wine to the Longxiang army who died in Lu province, the Serenity Cavalry who died in Jibei and outside Heluku, the Border Army who died in Heluku, and the Border Army who died in Heluku. In the Forest of Steels, there were 300,000 nameless steels, and 36,872 names were written on them. In the night, wishing lanterns rose slowly in the city of Liangzhou. After the 5 riders left the city, Su Fengyan stopped his horse and looked back. He took off his wine pot and drank a mouthful. 1 year later, how many people in the Beiliang Border Army would not be able to drink this wine? A few years later, how many of the millions of people in Beiliang would miss this green ant wine before they died? At this moment, the scene in Su Fengyan's eyes was like fire spirits rising in the city. Chapter 1433. Su Fengyan, Su Yanbing, Huyan Daguan, Tantai Pingjing, and Taima Dyer. 5 riders headed south to Lingzhou. 3 of them were in the top 14. Tantai Pingjing was now the most famous Qi cultivator grandmaster in the world, and the other was the most promising swordsman in Beimang. It was only a matter of time before they were on the rankings. This was an unprecedented lineup. Compared to the 9 swords of the Wu family that had defeated Beimang's 10,000 riders, they were much better. Taima Dai, did not know why he had to make this trip south. Deep in his heart, he did not like that young king. However, Huyan Daguan wanted him to come along, so Taima Dai could only follow. It was rumored in Beimang that Su Fengyan had not only inherited Li Chuangong's Azure Dragon sleeves, but Dong Tai had also taught him the flying sword technique. Although Su Fengyan was used to showing people his sword, Taima Dai did not doubt that if Su Fengyan really used a sword, he would not be his match. Taima Dai was silent along the way. There were many times when he wanted to ask Huyan Daguan, who was not willing to admit to being his master, if he could surpass Su Fengyan in swordsmanship. Taima Dai did not realize that he, who had little desire to win since he started practicing swordsmanship, was different now. The 5 riders galloped along the Lingzhou post house, known as Jiangnan. Taima Dai had been carefully observing Su Fengyan's words and actions. It was not that he did not find any clues. For example, although Su Fengyan wore his cold sword on his left waist, this king of Beiliang was actually secretly left-handed. When he fought an enemy, whether he wielded his sword in his right hand or his left hand would make a huge difference. Then there was Su Fengyan. Although his qi seemed to be flowing slowly and dry like it was dry season, the water surface was very shallow, almost reaching the bottom. However, Taima Dai knew that if his qi was flowing like a river during flood season and looked fierce, then Su Fengyan was the Guangling River in Liang. The more dry it was, the more lofty it was. The depth and width of the river was terrifying. The 5 riders stopped at the northernmost part of Lingzhou and turned off the post house. They followed a small path and turned into a mountain range. On the mountain path, there were many strong Liang men under the protection of Beiliang soldiers carrying stone and stone slabs out of the mountains. Under the protection of the Beiliang soldiers. The person leading the way for the 5 riders was a spy from the Fushuai chamber who had been waiting at the entrance to the mountain for a long time. He was a middle-aged man with an ordinary appearance. He did not have the shrewdness that a spy should have. He gave off the rough aura of someone who lived close to the mountains. The man's surname was Liu, and he was a small spy leader in the second-class branch of Wuxia society. He only knew that he was going to pick someone up, but he didn't tell him who he was going to pick up. When he met the 5 riders with different accents, the spy wasn't sure where they came from. However, since the leader of Lingzhou's spies, the first-class branch of Wuxia society, had said a few harsh words for the first time, he carefully accompanied the 5 riders into the mountain. Along the way, the man carefully explained the history of the quarry to them. He said that the place was called Jianyu Mountain in the local area, but the scholars of Lingzhou liked to call it the Paradise. Ever since the Great Feng dynasty established the protectorate of the western regions further west of Beiliang, most of the stone used to build the military towns in Qingcanglin was cut from this place. Later on, it was the same for the construction of the prince's manor on Mount Qingliang. It was even more so for the construction of Huda's city, which took 6 years at the border of Liangzhou. In the end, Su Fengyan and the other 4 had no choice but to lead their horses forward. They came to the top of a mountain and looked down at the mountain range. After the beginning of spring, the scenery was lush and verdant. However, as far as their eyes could see, it was as if the peak under their feet had long been an empty shell. Ever since the Great Feng dynasty, after nearly 500 years of stone mining, this Diyu paradise, which was one of the 36 blessings of Taoism, had truly become a paradise in name. It was made up of 16 large caves and nearly 1,000 caves. Looking down from the side peaks, the winding plank paths climbed all over the mountain range. On the main peak, there were occasional Taoist temples with flying eaves hidden in a cage of greenery. Day after day, year after year, tens of thousands of stone miners in Beiliang worked hard to make a living here, while people who sought immortality were born here to cultivate Taoism. Su Fengyan stood on the top of the mountain and was lost in thought. Diyu Paradise had been brightly lit since the beginning of the year. It had welcomed the peak of stone mining. Because of this, even the Taoist priests in the temples who usually did not care about worldly affairs could not sit still. They were afraid that the young vassal king would be determined to completely empty the entire mountain range. When that time came, where they find a paradise? On the eve of the Qingming festival, 3 elderly Taoist priests jointly visited the Lingzhou provincial governor's manor. They tactfully raised objections to Su Beiji. They even did not hesitate to use the reason that this move would harm Beiliang's foundation and fate. Su Beiji treated them with courtesy, but the government still carried on with the stone mining as usual. As the main culprit, Su Fengyan certainly knew the secret. He spread the word that another Huda city would be built behind the 3rd line of defense at the Heavy Tomb. It would only take 3 years. The administrator Li Gongda and a Mahis master would be the supervisor. Su Fengyan would personally be the deputy supervisor. The new unnamed city will be built facing the Songzhan Mountain. Its scale will be even bigger than Huda City. When the time came, it would become the new largest city in the northwest. Would the city be built? Of course, Su Fengyan wanted to tell Beimang, Baiding, and Shijing, especially Dongjua, the king of the southern courtyard, that even if they succeeded in destroying Huda City, Liuyao Fuling, and the Heavy Tomb, Beiliang still had to break through another city before they could enter Beiliang's Taoist territory. Would Beiliang's tax revenue, which was not rich to begin with, be cut off because of this? The answer was of course, but Su Fengyan was staking everything on this one throw. In the entire Liangzhou, other than the 3 border armies and the army guarding the pass, everyone else had to rush to the Songzhan Mountain area to contribute to the construction of the new city. All of this was actually a cover for the final battle at the mouth of the Calabash a year later. Su Fengyan had to force Beimang to have no choice but to focus on Liangzhou's front line. To this end, Su Fengyan and Chu Lushan even discussed a desperate plan where Liangzhou would win and Liuzhou would lose. This was because Liuzhou only had meaning if they won or lost. In a stalemate, Liuzhou had no strategic value. Of course, even if Liuzhou lost, it would only allow Beimang and Lu Gui to win. If it was a Pyrrhic victory, then Ko Jianghuai would become an important chess piece. It was precisely because of Ko Jianghuai's arrival that Chu Lushan came up with the idea of being even more ruthless to the enemy than to himself. Then, Su Fengyan agreed. This meant that the 30,000 Longxiang soldiers, the 3 towns of Liuzhou and Xianxia, and 100,000 refugees who had not yet moved into Beiliang would definitely be in danger. And Su Fengnian's younger brother, Su Longxiang, would be the first to bear the brunt of this. Therefore, when Su Fengnian agreed, Chu Lushan's expression was complicated. Later, in Wutong'an on Mount Qingliang, Su Weisheng did not treat Su Fengnian well. This was probably because she was conflicted about Su Fengnian's decision. Su Fengnian pointed to a cave in the distance, then turned to Tantai and asked calmly with a smile, "After I heard about the stone quarrying in the grotto heaven of Lanyu, I couldn't understand why the grotto heaven was so majestic, but the entrance was so narrow. Back then, I only heard from my master that quarrying in the grotto heaven was actually not as difficult as outsiders thought. To use the words of those who followed in their father's footsteps, it was like cutting soft tofu with a knife. However, after the stone was hung out of the grotto heaven, it would quickly become as hard as iron." Sect Master Tantai, "Do you know what's going on here?" Tantai said softly, "Many tombs and antiques that have been preserved for thousands of years will vanish when they see the light of day again. The stone in the mountainside hardens when it comes out of the mountain, probably because of the same principle, but a different manifestation. It's the result of the fusion of material and gas." Su Fengnian wanted to say something, but stopped. He tried to hold back his laughter. After a long time, he finally could not help but say, "When I was young, I was unscrupulous and spoke without thinking. After pondering for a long time, I finally came up with an explanation. I felt that the stone turning from soft to hard was actually like a fledgling taking off his pants after seeing the world in the brothel. As a result, I went to Tide Listening Pavilion and was punished by my master to copy tens of thousands of words of the sage's classics. At that time, I even wanted to die." Tantai, who was dressed in white like an immortal, took a deep breath. Huyan Dagwan smirked and told the real fledgling Taimu about the general idea. The latter rolled his eyes. Su Fengnian turned his head and asked, "Master Tantai, can I ask one more question?" The Qi cultivator sneered, "Can I not answer?" Su Fengnian had to be thick-skinned and asked, "Is it possible for a person to stay at the bottom of the lake without eating or drinking for 10 or 20 years? Is it possible for the best Taoist to abstain from food and gas, or the Buddhist to meditate in meditation? Do you Qi refinement warriors have any similar skills?" Tantai Pingjing kept silent. It was Huyan Dagwan who said, "As long as it's not at the bottom of the lake, it's possible." Su Fengnian fell into deep thought. How did Chu Kuangren with the clavicle chain and the saber do it? This was something he had been curious about since he went to Wutang Mountain to practice his saber. At that time, he thought that his realm was not enough and did not understand the power of a first-rank martial arts master. However, when he reached the Vajra realm, he realized that even if he reached the Vajra realm, it was impossible. After that, he advanced to the Xian Finger realm and Celestial Phenomenon realm, but Su Fengnian still could not get a reasonable answer. Later, when Gao Shulu was unsealed and they fought, he achieved the celestial body. Only then did he know that to reach Chu Kuangren's level, only a land immortal who was good at Qi cultivation could barely do it. However, in Su Fengnian's eyes, Chu Kuangren's martial arts realm was not too high. He was at the first rank, but he was definitely not at the celestial phenomenon realm. This was enough to make Su Fengnian puzzled. Back then, the suppression of the old man with 2 sabers who came from the Beimang princess tomb, like Helian Wu, was done by Old Huang. However, the real mastermind behind the Tide Listening Pavilion's top floor was the master behind it. However, the master did not give any clues until his death. Chapter 1434. Su Fengnian suddenly lamented. The wise man devises his strategies. The brave man exerts his strength. The benevolent man spreads his benefits, and the faithful man is loyal. The civil and military struggle. The monarch and his subjects live in harmony, and he can rule with his head bowed. Rule with his head bowed. It sounds easy, but in the past dynasties, except for those emperors who enjoyed the peace of the world, they wanted to expand their territory in prosperous times, but in troubled times, they wanted to protect their ancestral lands. Taking a step back, if both civil and military are used, then who is the wise man scheming for? Is it for the monarch or the people? Isn't Zhang Julu's death the price for the nobility of the people and the monarch of the people? If the brave man exerts his strength, will he be greedy? A man who is never content is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Will he be addicted to sitting on the dragon throne? The benevolent man nurtures his hopes, and the mud and sand go down together. Is he fishing for fame? For example, like this old man of the Song family, who steals copies of memorials to the imperial calendar in order to leave his name in history. If the faithful man is loyal, will there be officials who are foolishly loyal and actually bring disaster to the country? Su Fengyan mocked himself. Who doesn't want to be an emperor? When I was young, I often thought that other than the dream of being a hero, which is now gone, the next dream was to be an emperor. Once I had the power of the dynasty in my hands, I could kill all the eyesores in the world, and all the women in the world would be mine. How refreshing would that be? However, as time passed, I realized that being an emperor really wasn't easy. Zhao Zhuan's grandfather wanted to kill Su Xiao. Zhao Zhuan's father killed the Han family of Ji province, and before he died, he had to kill Zhang Julu before he could rest in peace. Zhao Dun and Li Yang didn't accept Li Xiaoxin's new calendar from the two Zen temples, and didn't choose to let the world have 60 more years of peace. Instead, they let the descendants of the Zhao family have a few more years of imperial power. I think it was also at that moment that Zhao Dun and Zhang Julu, a pair of wise monarchs and famous officials who could have been immortalized through the ages, began to truly part ways. Only then could Zhang Julu make up his mind to seek death, and Zhao Dun forced himself to let Bai Yin die. I asked myself, if one day I finally become the emperor, would I feel more and more guilty when faced with so many choices? Would they kill Su Beiji, Chen Shiliang, Chu Lushan, and Yuan Zuozong? Would they break up the Bailiang frontier army and let the old men who wanted to die on the backs of the horses beyond the Great Wall die on their beds in the misty Central Plains? In the future, the sons and grandsons of Su Fengyan, will the men fight with each other for a seat? When they are young, they will make solemn vows and talk cheerfully, but when they are older, they will hide daggers behind their smiles and turn against each other. Will women marry people they don't even love? Su Fengyan looked at Su Yanbing and asked with a smile, "Uncle Su, is this considered soft-heartedness?" Su Yanbing nodded but said, "There is a saying that soft-heartedness doesn't lead an army, but it doesn't mean that those who lead an army have to have a heart of stone." The four great generals of the spring and autumn period who are equally famous as the great general, whether it's Yi Baikue or Gu Jiantang, are usually very amiable and approachable when leading an army. Training an army for 1,000 days to use it for a single day. The time when one is truly ruthless and merciless is when one uses the army. On this point, Chu Lushan did very well. Su Fengyan gently looked to the south. Over there was someone who did even better than Chu Lushan. The five of them led their horses down the mountain. The spy, surnamed Lu, who had been standing far away from them, continued to lead the way. At the foot of the mountain, they happened to run into a large group of quarrymen who had come out of the depths of the mountain. The mountain path, paved with crushed stone, was only wide enough for 3 or 4 people to walk side by side. The smaller stones were tied up in layers on wheelbarrows and transported out of the mountain. The larger stones were placed on donkey carts and ox carts. There were also many quarrymen carrying stones in groups. Compared to Nanzhao's red sandalwood, which was worth an inch of gold and could be transported by river, the transportation of stone was even more clumsy. When Su Fengyan was about to mount his horse and leave the mountain, he saw a white-haired but tall old quarryman who was physically exhausted. The long piece of stone on his back suddenly tilted, and the old man fell along with the stone onto the path of crushed stones. Fortunately, the old man's body was still healthy and did not hurt his muscles or bones. He sat on the ground awkwardly and smiled bitterly. A Lingzhou quarry supervisor wearing armor and carrying a sword turned a blind eye. He did not arrogantly crack his whip like the government's lackeys in Liang. He allowed a young, dark-skinned quarryman to secretly stop and hand the old man a jug of strong wine. The nearby Bailiang soldiers wanted to go forward and stop them, but the supervisor, who looked like a deputy captain, gently shook his head and used his gaze to stop his soldiers from going forward. However, when Su Fengyan approached, 7 or 8 soldiers simultaneously held their swords and glared at him. The quarry was currently not open to the public. The outsiders who could enter were all people who were close to the government and had a clean family record in the whisk room. After all, the large and small Taoist temples in Dayu Paradise still needed the support of incense. The Great War of Liangmang had begun, and more people came to pray for blessings. The most prosperous Lingzhou naturally had a lot of incense. Regardless of whether they were rich or poor, they all asked for something like a protective talisman. Su Beiji set an unwritten rule for the large and small Taoist temples in Lingzhou. In the past, they did not have to hand over incense money to the government. They had to take 2 or 3 or 4 out of every 10 miles. For a forbidden land like Dayu Paradise, because the government was lenient, they had to take 4% of the incense money. Therefore, after Su Beiji bought the Rice provincial governor, he had the reputation of being a popular provincial governor. It was only when Spy Lu stepped forward that the Lingzhou soldiers in charge of transporting the quarry retreated. However, their eyes were still alert. The quarry old man who drank a mouthful of strong wine raised his head and looked at the handsome young master in front of him. He did not have stage fright. He was probably a talkative person. He took the initiative to smile and said, "This young master is going to Chongshan Temple to burn incense, right? It's not that I want to put in a good word for Chongshan Temple, but the marriage fortune sticks there are very effective. These years, I have seen many young masters and ladies come back after making their wishes. The old man's outrageous grandson also managed to find a pretty good granddaughter-in-law for the old man after winning the lottery at the monastery. Nowadays, people in Lingzhou say that other than Wudong Mountain's fortune sticks, everything else is the most effective. In terms of marriage fortune sticks, it will be Chongshan Temple's turn." Speaking of which, the extremely hospitable old man unconsciously raised his hand as if he wanted to invite the young master to drink a mouthful. However, he quickly pulled his hand back. It was clear that he realized that this kind of green ant wine that could be bought for 20 copper coins was expensive for quarrying people like him. But how could a young master like him drink it? Su Fengyan was originally going to take the wine pot, but when the old man pulled his hand back, he could only give up. He smiled and squatted down. Soon, Su Yambing took a wine pot from the horse's back and threw it over. Su Fengyan reached out to catch it and handed it to the old man. "Old uncle, drink mine. If you don't mind, you can take it all." The old man was not polite. After taking the wine pot, he opened it and sniffed it hard. He laughed and said, "It's both green ant wine. They have the same name, but just by smelling it, I know that young master's wine is more valuable. I like to drink all my life. If someone gives me wine to drink, I won't refuse. However, I'll just pour a few mouthfuls into my grandson's wine pot. I won't have the face to ask for more." The old man really poured a few mouthfuls of wine into his own wine pot. After pouring the wine, he shook the crude wine pot before returning the exquisite wine pot to Su Fengyan. The old man did not forget to say, "This old man will say something. Young master, don't be angry. Although young master looks like a rich person from a large family, you can't be so extravagant. No matter how big your family business is, you have to be careful with your spending. If young master doesn't like to hear it, just treat it as this old man farting. Don't ask for the wine back." The dark-skinned young man was a bit nervous. Compared to his grandfather, who had spent his entire life dealing with rocks in the deep mountains, he had been to many more counties in Lingzhou and knew the severity of the situation. He had also seen many rich young masters dressed in fine clothes and had heard many rumors about the arrogant young masters. Although everyone in Lingzhou knew about the embroidered Roman cavalry that had locked up many rich young masters, this young stonecutter was still quite nervous when he was in close proximity to someone of the same age who had a high family background. Su Fengyan smiled and said, "The person in charge of the family has to have a way of managing the family." "That's right, old uncle. I heard that your Big Fish Mountain quarry can only mine 80 pounds of rocks a day. Although there are 25 miles of mountain roads in 2 trips, it shouldn't be too tiring. Why does old uncle have to carry 100 pounds of rocks in one trip? The young stonecutter did not want his grandfather to say too much to an outsider, so he reminded him, "Grandfather, we need to move." With the help of his grandson, the old man knelt down and tied the leather rope that was used to tie the rocks. After he slowly stood up, he turned his head to Su Fengnian and said with a smile, "The provincial governor did have such a rule, but young master might not know." The quarry also said that after completing a mission of 120 pounds of rocks, if you carry an extra 10 pounds of rocks, you will be rewarded 1 copper coin. This old man, my grandson, and my 2 sons, the 4 of us together, can carry an extra 4 to 500 pounds. That is 40 to 50 copper coins. For our family, this is not bad. This old man still has some strength, and my sons and grandson are filial. They only let this old man carry 1 trip. Isn't this because they want to carry 20 to 30 pounds of rocks in 1 trip? It will be slower, but it will also be good to earn 2 or 3 copper coins. The government has also been very straightforward in paying the bill, so we have more motivation to work. Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. Chapter 1435. Perhaps it was because the old man had drunk a few mouthfuls of good wine and still wanted more. His smile was simple and honest. In the end, he said to Su Fengnian, "However, this old man is already so old. Whether or not I earn those 2 or 3 copper coins doesn't really matter. It's just that when I heard that the prince wanted to build a large city in the north of Liangzhou to fight the Beimang barbarians, this old man thought that even though I won't have the chance to go north in this lifetime, at least I still have some strength left, so I can carry 20 to 30 caddies a day. Not only can I earn 2 or 3 copper coins, but I also feel that when the city is built in the future, perhaps the extra stones I carry will be able to block a few more arrows from the northern barbarians." When I think of this old man's heart feels comfortable. Many of the young children in the village don't quarry with their fathers anymore. They've seen the sights of many cities in Lingzhou, and their hearts have grown bigger. They don't think it's good for nothing to dig for stones in the mountains, so they've all gone to become border soldiers. Us old men can carry several tens of thousands of caddies of stones. The sooner the city is built, the more likely they'll be able to come back for the new year. The old man suddenly paused and looked into the distant sky. He murmured softly, "I heard from the officials and soldiers in the quarry that half of the 300,000 stone tablets behind the prince's house are made from the stones of our Big Fish Mountain. Those old fellows who have children in their families who join the army all say that if there's a day when someone in their family can't come back and they want to carve their name on the tablets, then using the stone from our hometown is also good." The old man had already begun to walk forward. Suddenly, the young master of the wealthy family called out from behind him, "Uncle, wait a moment." Then, the young stonemason was surprised to see that person take off his fur coat and hand it to the white-clothed woman who was as tall as a man, but looked like an immortal. That person walked to his grandfather's side and untied the rope without any explanation. He carried the stone on his back. He didn't look like a young master who knew how to do rough work. Carrying over 100 caddies of stone, he was actually calm and composed. Behind that person, there were 4 people with extraordinary auras who leisurely led their horses forward. It made that person's head seem to be a bit off. What was going on? The dark-skinned young stonemason was momentarily distracted. Could it be that the hedonistic young masters of Bailiang were all so easy to talk to? On the other hand, the old stonemason was more at ease than his grandson. He lived to 70 years of age. Perhaps the more he spent time with dead things, the more he could see the black and white of people's hearts. He didn't know if the young master who gave him the wine was a good person or... The old man couldn't figure out why the young master beside him would help him carry the stone out of the mountain, and he was too lazy to think about it. It was just like the stone quarrymen of Mount Big Fish had passed down from generation to generation that there was a cave in the mountain, and there was a pond in the cave. In the pond, there was a spiritual creature that looked like a fish or a snake, waiting for the day it turned into a dragon. It was just that no one had seen it with their own eyes. Nowadays, the young people with broader horizons didn't quite believe it, but the older generation was still willing to believe it. To Unfortunately, the handsome guy said that he already had a wife, which made the old woman feel very regretful. In the end, after the young man removed the stone, he said something inexplicable to the old man, saying that he would do his best. The old man didn't understand what he was saying, so he could only nod with a smile. Taimu Dai originally thought that Su Fengnian, the king of Bailiang, had nothing better to do and was bribing the hearts of the people with the stone quarrymen. It was inevitable that the Lingzhou spy would accidentally reveal their identity. He never thought that after Su Fengnian put on his coat, he would directly come out of the mountain. Even the spy was kept in the dark from start to finish and did not know their true identity. In the end, Taimu Dai could only feel that this young king was really boring. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to reason with him. 5 riders came to the grotto heaven of Diyu. In the end, 4 of them left the mountain first. The tall woman who joined forces with Su Yambing to cause fatal trouble to Taimu Dai, and the others said that she wanted to go back to the mountain. Tantai Pingjing rode into the mountain alone and finally led the horse to the mountainside of another side peak of the grotto heaven of Diyu. However, she did not enter the cave. She stood at the entrance of the cave and waited. In the twilight, night, and dawn, she finally waited for 2 foreign Taoist priests, a young Taoist priest and a young Taoist priest. Their Taoist robes were obviously different from the Taoist priest of the Diyu Mountain that the stone quarrymen often saw. The young Taoist priest greeted Tantai Pingjing gently. "I'm Li Yufu from Wudong. Greetings to Senior Tantai." The young Taoist priest followed his master and bowed. "I'm Yufu from Wudong. Greetings to Senior Tantai." Tantai Pingjing looked at the master and disciple who walked out of Wudong Mountain and walked into the grotto heaven of Diyu Mountain. She said indifferently, "Master Li also saw the great opportunity?" Li Yufu smiled and said, "I'd like to thank you for waiting." Tantai Pingjing seemed to be standing at the entrance of the cave, but in fact, she was blocking the entrance of the cave. Her tone was not very kind. "This fate first started between us. We watched the white snake transform into a flood dragon, and then we watched it go upstream. Now, it's him who triggered the vision." The young Taoist priest said seriously, "The great way under our feet is accessible to everyone." Tantai Pingjing looked at the child who pretended to be a master and smiled. The young Taoist priest blushed slightly when he was stared at. Soon, his momentum weakened and he whispered, "Master said so." The young Taoist priest, who was the current chief of Wudong Mountain, had a warm look in his eyes. He raised his hand and touched his disciple's head. "You said so." Tantai Pingjing looked at the master and disciple with a complicated look in her eyes. She concealed it and said, "Earthlung Mountain and Guangling River. You also formed 2 fates, but..." Li Yufu waved his hand gently and smiled. "Master Tantai, you can rest assured. We didn't come to the grotto heaven of the Diyu Mountain to fight for anything. I just wanted to take you Fu around and have a look." Tantai Pingjing shook her head and said, "You Taoists don't fight, but you fight." Chapter 1436. Tantai Pingjing looked at the young leader of Wudong, who was not anxious, and said slowly, "In the past, the Great Qin dynasty has always advocated the same kind of celestial beings. Your Taoist sage took the lead in proposing that heaven and earth are heartless. My master once commented, 'The true meaning of this is that heaven and earth have no kindness or malice to people.' It can be said that heaven and earth are shocking thunder." Later generations, based on their preferences, misinterpreted it as being able to become a sage and treat all things in the world as dogs. At the end of the Great Qin dynasty, the Confucian sage advocated that human nature is good and that heaven and earth are connected. However, the root of it is only a tendency to return to the same kind of celestial beings. Huang Sanjia called it removing the clouds to see the moon instead of removing the clouds to see the sun. As for Buddhism, it is a foreign religion. Let's not talk about it. Tantai Pingjing's eyes suddenly sharpened and stared at the leader of Wudong. "You, Li Yufu, want to make decisions for the world by your own will. Do you really dare to say that you are not wrong?" Li Yufu said calmly. Doing things by yourself, right or wrong, is more reasonable than others asking you to do good or bad things. Li Yufu no longer looked at the leader of Guanyin sect, but looked up at the sky as if he was talking to the sky. The living of heaven and earth are neither sad nor happy. The dead of heaven and earth are carefree. In between life and death, how can we control those superior people who have already transcended life and death? Born and dying in heaven and earth, we should not ask how to live forever. We should ask why we were born and how to live better. The courtesy of Confucianism, the purity of Taoism, or the mercy of Buddhism. In the 100 years of self-questioning and self-answering in this life, some people will gain and some will lose. Later generations will eventually have self-knowledge, self-respect, self-improvement, independence, and freedom. Although life is short, the noble spirit will last forever. Tantai Pingjing stared at the young Taoist who dared to ask heaven and smiled helplessly. She stepped away from the path of the cave and stepped forward to leave. It was like something, no matter how much she cherished it, if she could not own it, then she would not look at it. The little Taoist boy bowed politely to her back and said, "Thank you, senior." Tantai Pingjing looked back and asked with a smile, "Lu Dongxian? Qi Xuanjin? Hong Shi Xiang?" The little Taoist was stunned. "Senior, my name is Yufu." Li Yufu led the little Taoist boy into the cave and lit the torch he had prepared beforehand. After walking for an hour, they arrived at a deep green pond. He placed the torch between the walls of the mountain and then took out several oil pots and an ancient oil lamp from his bag. He sat down cross-legged and bent over to light the lamp. Yufu also sat down. After waiting for a long time, the little Taoist boy did not see any movement on the mirror-like surface of the pond. He could only look at the wick and asked in puzzlement, "Master, what are we doing?" Li Yufu laughed softly. "When I'm bored, I'll recite the classics." The little Taoist boy nodded and began to recite the Pearl Sack catalog. After an hour, his mouth was really dry and he turned his head with a bitter expression. Li Yufu said softly, "Rest if you're tired." The little Taoist boy smiled happily. After that, Li Yufu refilled the oil lamp. Yufu, who had eaten some dried dates to fill his stomach, was already sleepy. Li Yufu let the child rest on his lap and slowly fell asleep. Li Yufu also closed his eyes to rest. The surface of the pond rippled slightly. Then a small fish with half red and half white jumped out. The shape of a carp could be vaguely seen, and its two whiskers were extremely long. It swam to the edge of the pond, and its whiskers swayed gently. The fish scales on its body were shining like dragon armor, shining brightly. Li Yufu opened his eyes and smiled. "After we parted at the Guangling River, you and I meet again." It swayed its whiskers and white tail cheerfully. Li Yufu said softly, "I'm willing to protect you from the river to the sea and help you become a dragon. If the future generations suffer from a drought, are you willing to create clouds and rain for the world? If there is a king who is heartless, are you willing to warn him on behalf of the heavens? If you feel lonely, will you still not stir up trouble? If you can't overcome each other, will you live in peace with the world?" It was still and motionless. Li Yufu laughed. "As the Bailiang of the place where your dragon rises, you don't have to worry with him. The hearts of the people and the power of heaven and earth." It swayed its tail slightly and broke through the water surface, floating above the pond. Li Yufu gently pinched his fingers. 3 days later, you and I will go down the mountain and enter the river. We will say goodbye at the mouth of the Guangling River." It seemed to nod and slowly dive back into the pond. Li Yufu sighed slightly and looked down at the little Taoist child who was drooling. He listened to the child's vague ravings and murmured, "Youngest uncle, when you are enlightened, before Li Yufu cuts off heaven and earth, I will ask her to come back. After that, there will be no afterlife." Li Yufu closed his eyes and smiled. "In fact, if there is an afterlife, how good would it be if I could call you youngest uncle again? Unfortunately, there is no such thing." In the spring of the second year of Xiangfu, 2 Taoist priests of Wudong Mountain left Bailiang and began to walk eastward along the Guangling River. Wherever they went, there was a spring rain that was as precious as oil. When a mistress of Shishu's spring invitation cottage heard that the young vassal king's trip to Lingzhou was actually so cowardly that he had to bring several martial arts masters with him before he dared to leave Liangzhou, she sneered at him. Before they even met, she already looked down on the young man with the surname Su. Naturally, she felt more and more resentful towards the man beside her who rode into Shu alone. However, when she accompanied two of the most legendary men in the world and saw the 5 riders appear in her sight with her own eyes, there was no reason for this woman to recognize that person at first glance. At that time, she knew that the young man seemed to be really qualified to let the current king of Shu return to Lingzhou. He was qualified to let Mr. Xie go to Shu to catch a dragon and raise a dragon to deal with him. Of course, she also hated that guy called Su Fengnian more and more. However, the beautiful Xianxia, who had been on a Rouge reviews twice, was not only disgusted, but she even had the intention to kill. Because the first thing that guy said after he got off the horse was, "Aunt Xia, right? Why didn't you bring the child with you to Lingzhou? The red packet is already prepared." Chapter 1437. Compared to the 2 prefectures where the smoke of war was imminent, Lingzhou, which was the backyard of northern Liang, still had many handsome men and beautiful women going for a walk in the spring. Many young children in the city were happily flying kites, and the children of the wealthy would string colorful lanterns on the kite string. For example, near their courtyard, there were no less than 10 kites flying in the sky. The children's laughter unknowingly diluted the tense atmosphere after the 2 groups of people met. However, Su Fengnian's unexpected opening speech seemed to spoil the mood a bit. As the most beautiful woman in Western Shu in the past 20 years, Xianxia of the Spring Invitation Cottage had entered the Rouge Review at the age of 14. She was known for her skin as white as mutton fat jade and her hands as soft as lotus buds. 10 years later, she won the Rouge Review for a second time. Although her real age was 26, it was not an exaggeration to say that she was a 16-year-old beauty. Xianxia's figure was like most women in Shu. She was thin and delicate with an extremely thin waist. Xianxia's skin was especially white. No wonder she had the nickname of the Moon Palace Fairy. Many men in Shu dreamed of her. Su Fengnian was far away in Beiliang. He heard that the Western Shu administrator had been coveting her for a long time. If Chen Jibao had not been the vassal of Western Shu and became the guest of honor of the Spring Invitation Cottage, Xianxia would have become a caged sparrow in the administrator's mansion after she died at the hands of Su Fengnian by the Spring God Lake. After Su Fengnian teased him, he led the horse forward. He did not immediately look at the man in white standing in the middle of the 3 people at the door. Instead, he looked at Xie Guaning, who looked like a middle-aged Confucian scholar. His courtesy name was Shu Yang, and his nickname was Flying Fish. He and Li Yishan were once called Northern Xie, Southern Li. They commented on each other's romantic life. Of course, what interested Su Fengnian the most was not this person's extravagance in catching and raising real dragons, but his identity as the father of White Fox. For some reason, White Fox Face said that he was dead. Moreover, he did not take Xie Guaning's surname, but Nangong. Naturally, this was another matter of confusion. As for why Chen Jibao wanted to meet him, Su Fengnian could guess a little. This was because the 3rd son of Heaven's favored son who had the potential to sit on the dragon throne was the king of Yanqi, His Royal Highness Zhao Zhu, the little beggar from back then. If Chen Jibao wanted to legitimately walk out of Western Shu, he would have to make use of the situation in West Shu and become the key figure who would break into the capital of West Shu before the Southern Xinjiang army. Beiliang would have to play a key role in this matter. If Su Fengnian was determined to contain Western Shu's military forces, then Zhao Zhu's chances of success would be far greater than Chen Jibao's. Of course, this time Western Shu definitely did not come here to beg for help. Instead, they wanted to make a hidden exchange. As long as Beiliang did not drag Western Shu's entry into the Central Plains, then Western Shu would not cause trouble for Beiliang's backyard during the Great War of Liangmang. This would test the tacit understanding between the 2 sides. If both sides agreed, then everyone would be happy. However, as long as either Su Fengnian or Chen Jibao was unwilling to take a step back, then after today, the two sides would completely fall out and fight to the death. Bailiang would be attacked from both sides, and Western Shu would also miss the opportunity to seize the throne in the Central Plains. Perhaps this would be an awkward situation where one steps slower than the next. This deal could very well decide who the entire Central Plains belonged to, or even the surname of the entire world. Otherwise, given Chun Jibao's nature, why would he return to Bailiang and take the initiative to meet with Su Fengyan? Moreover, it was most likely Xie Guining who instigated this white-clothed military saint to leave Shu and enter Liang. It was probably because Xie Guining was Chun Jibao's trusted aide and understood the importance of this meeting. Thus, even though Su Fengyan's teasing made her seethe with anger and hammered her weak spot with a hammer, she still didn't show any displeasure. The group entered the luxurious Jiangnan-style residence. Su Fengyan and Chun Jibao walked side by side at the very front, followed by Tantai Pingjing and Xie Guining, and finally Xie Guining and Su Yanbing. Huyan Dagwan and Taimu Dai, who didn't follow. Huyan Dagwan said that it didn't look like he was going to fight immediately. He had to go to the streets of Lingbei City to buy some strange objects for his wife and daughter. Then, this Beimang martial grandmaster directly left. In reality, on this trip to Lingzhou, Huyan Dagwan had already made it clear to Su Fengyan on Mount Qingliang that he wouldn't help Bailiang kill anyone. However, if Su Fengyan's life was in danger, he would step in to save him. Su Fengyan naturally wouldn't ask for anything. For a martial artist like Huyan Dagwan, who was extremely close to Wang Xinji's realm, unless it was someone like Su Yanbing and Chao Changqing who had too many things that they couldn't let go of, no one would care about the world. For example, although Dong Tai was a relative of Su Fengyan, he was also unwilling and disdained to care about the trend of the battle between Liang Mang and Liang Mang. It was the same for Sui Xiegu. The reason why he stayed in Bailiang was probably because he wanted to occasionally show his face to Tantai Pingjing and get scolded. Putting aside the weak Xie Guining on Bailiang's side, there was Su Fengyan whose realm was damaged, Su Yanbing who was half a step away, and the number 1 Qi cultivator, Tantai Pingjing. On Shishu's side, there was Chun Jibao who was uncertain whether he had already transcended mortality and entered the divine realm, and Xie Guining who was ranked first on the immortal land painting. They should be evenly matched. The 6 people sat down in the quiet courtyard. As a woman who had been on the ranking list twice, Xie Guining really had too many praiseworthy, unique skills. Among them, the tea she made was called Yuhua tea. Xie Guining's hands had the reputation of lotus buds, and she was proficient in the tea ceremony. Countless Taoist immortals in Shu praised her tea as neutral and clean, with high charm and tranquility. When you drink it, the wind blows in your armpits, as if you have become a feather and fly. The tea leaves that Xie Guining used to make the tea now were the number 1 treasure of Mount Fire, the pre-Ming spring tea. The tea utensils and tea sets that she brought from the spring invitation cottage were scattered, and there were as many as 18 of them. They must be the set of priceless 18 scholars. Even Su Fengyan had to admit that the tea made by this Western Shu woman in front of him was indeed pleasing to the eye. Her every movement was graceful, and most importantly, it contained a kind of meditative and forgetful feeling. No wonder the Western Shu Taoists praised her so much. Xie Guining was the first to drink a mouthful of tea. After putting down the cup, she was the first to break the silence. Without any superficial pleasantries, she went straight to the point. Chao Changqing is well aware that if West Shu wants to attack Tai and city in one go, they cannot lose a single battle. Otherwise, the entire Guangling Road situation will rapidly take a turn for the worse. At present, the Mo sword formation, which was born out of the great halberd warriors, has already surfaced. Several of the main forces of field battle cavalry have also appeared. Excluding the Navy's 60,000 soldiers, West Shu has 170,000 soldiers on land. On the surface, they can be considered to be evenly matched with the Imperial Army led by Liu Xingxiang in the north and the 100,000 soldiers in the south. However, war has never been a battle of numbers on paper. Zhao Bing's army in the south is overall far more powerful than West Shu. Chapter 1438. Su Fingyan took a sip of tea. It was refreshing. His fingers swirled the rim of the cup, and he said with a smile, "The situation is still equal. Chao Changqing's navy will definitely swallow up Prince Guangling Zhao Yi's navy. After they merge, the Guangling River with the Guangling Navy will block the advance of the Southern Border Army to a great extent. Xia, she has West Chu's 170,000. Against the inferior Lu Xingxiang, they have a great chance of victory. After that, it would depend on whether or not the Qing Province Navy could help the Southern Border's army cross that natural moat. Otherwise, Chao Zhangqing would fight his way all the way to Grand Peace City, and Gu Jiantong's two vast border armies would also take advantage of the situation and head south. This was also the reason why the imperial decree of peace allowed Northern Mang's two easternmost generals to hold their bowls, and why they had a feigned weakness in front of Ji Bei's Yuan Tingshan. In this kind of rapid development, other than Gu Jiantang, the other factions are distant water that cannot quench the immediate thirst in the eyes of the court. Xia Guining seemed to have a card up his sleeve. He shook his head and said, "The Qingzhou Navy may not be unable to fight. Lu Xingxiang is not ordinary." Su Fingyan looked at the middle-aged man with white hair on his temples. For a moment, his mind wandered. He was indeed the father of White Fox Face. He was already so old, but he was still able to move the hearts of women. In terms of aura, it seemed that only big officer Chao Changqing could compete with him. It was not a lie to say that one had a scholarly aura. On the other hand, those true Jianghu people, the old man with the sheepskin fur coat, Dong Tai, and Huyan Dawan, were worlds apart. Of course, when Old Manly was young, he was invincible in both sword and person. Siegwa laughed involuntarily at this young vassal king who was distracted. He glanced at the calm white-robed man next to him and thought, no wonder Zhao Chongling had chosen him, who was surnamed Chun, and not his Royal Highness, who was surnamed Su. Su Fingyan smiled apologetically and then asked curiously, "It is not strange that Mr. Xia has long made plans in the Qingzhou Navy. However, if I remember correctly, when Lu Xingxiang left the Guangling Spring Snow Building, it was Yuan Bunshi who instructed him to do so. When the time comes, will he agree to give up the merit of entering and leaving the city? That means whether or not Lu Xianxiang can be promoted from Great General Liang to Minister of War. After all, in the future dynasty, Great General is just a nicer name. Ministers with real power are the most popular." Xia Guining smiled and asked, "Even if Lu Xianxiang wants to be the king of Bailiang who established the Central Plains, can he do it just because he wants to? What's more, today is different from the past. Even if he successfully besieges the city, he still needs to be busy fighting with that young heir of the southern border." Xia is keenly aware of the man she admires, and he frowns quietly. She could forget herself when making tea, but she could not forget him. Most women in the world were like this. No matter how otherworldly they were, there would always be a man who would bring them back to the world, and they would be willing to cook for him. Su Fingyan laughed softly and said, "In that case, the previous emperor Zhao Dun died early. Otherwise, Mr. Xia would not be so distressed." Xia Guining nodded and said, "If the previous emperor was still alive, I would not be in Lingzhou right now, but in the Qingzhou Navy." Everyone knew that Zhao Dun was very fond of Chen Jibao. Naturally, if Zhao Dun was still alive, he would not be like the current emperor, Zhao Zhuan, who tactfully rejected Chen Jibao's offer of only 10,000 men to go out of Shu to quell the rebellion. There were two emperors in the Zhao dynasty, and some things were passed down from generation to generation. For example, Zhao Zhuan treated Bailiang the same way as the previous emperor, which was to exhaust Bailiang's military power as much as possible without affecting the stability of the Central Plains. Otherwise, as long as the Su family of Bailiang was still around, removing the vassals would be a big joke. But some things had quietly changed, such as his attitude towards Chen Jibao, the Prince of Shu. Zhao Dun trusted and admired Chen Jibao almost to the point of being paranoid. As a self-proclaimed enlightened emperor, he was incomparably intoxicated by the feeling of the country has no equal capable generals who are willing to serve me. On the other hand, Zhao Zhuan's attitude turned into fear and suspicion. Xie Guining, who had been speaking warmly like an old friend, shook his head and refused to continue pouring tea. His aura changed abruptly, and his tone turned cold. Previously, the king of Shu and I had deduced the situation of Bailiang. If we evaluated you as an ordinary official, you would only be below average. If you built a big city south of North Zhongzhong and Liangzhou, you wouldn't even be below average. Su Fengnian smiled and did not say anything. Xie Guining continued, Bailiang's best plan is to rely on more than 100,000 of the world's most elite field cavalry to succeed in one battle. Su Fengnian asked calmly, Mr. Xie, do you mean to let Beimang's million troops stationed north of Huda City in Liangzhou and reenact the Battle of West Rampart? Xie Guining smiled and did not say anything. Xie Guining, who acted as the icing on the cake, was a little surprised. This repulsive young vassal king was not stupid. Mr. Xie was not trying to be an alarmist. He and Xie Guining had once stayed up all night to make a sand table deduction. However, at that time, the deduction was based on the fact that Xie Guining was in charge of Bailiang, not this young man with the surname Su. Under this premise, Beimang did not dare to divide its troops to attack the border from 3 fronts. It only dared to do it in one battle and make a big bet with Bailiang. To be precise, it was with him and Chun Jibao, who was standing next to Xie Guining. Mr. Xie acted as Dong Zhuo, and Chun Jibao acted as the defender of Bailiang. Both sides mobilized their troops, and it was very similar to the Battle of West Rampart. Both sides kept losing troops and increasing troops, competing to see who would be the first to be defeated. In the end, Mr. Xie tried his best, but still lost to Bailiang, who only had 30,000 cavalry and infantry left. In that shocking armchair war, Liuzhou, Yuzhou, and Lingzhou were all reduced to watching a show. All the tragic, treacherous, and exciting battles only happened in the north of Liangzhou. However, this was only the first move of that deduction, and it had not even reached the middle game. Next, it would be Bailiang forcing the heavily wounded Beimang to turn its spearhead to the Tu Liao. Bailiang would go from being Liang's vanguard to an idler, who had several years to recuperate. After consolidating the refugees of Liuzhou, they would join forces and break through the western regions in one go, and take over western Shu and Nanzhao. In the same tripartite balance, Liang and Beimang were constantly depleted, and Bailiang would quickly recover to a strength of 150,000 pure cavalry after regrouping. Then, Nanzhao and western Shu would raise 150,000 infantry, and once again have a total of 300,000 troops to participate in the struggle for the world. At that time, he chose to go up north from Liangzhou and Jizhou, and chose to flatten Beimang and Nanzhao before coveting the Central Plains. Finally, after becoming the master of the 6 major territories, Bailiang, Nanzhao, Western regions, Western Shu, and Nanzhao, he would occupy the high ground and directly bypass the already heavily wounded Gu Jiantong's Tu Liao defense lines. He would fight a decisive battle with Liang's army in Huainandao territory, and then go down south to Guanglingdao. He would not need to pay any attention to Taiyan City, and then fight the Nanjiang army. At that time, whether Gu Jiantong's 2 Liao border armies fought or not, it would no longer affect the overall situation. Thank You smiled happily. Su Fengnian could probably only think of the first move of that deduction. How could he guess the soul-stirring feelings of the middle game and the ending game? Then she was stunned. She only heard that guy ask with a smile, according to Mr. Xie's deduction rules, won't Gu Jiantang be the Minister of War of the new dynasty for another 20 years? Tan Taiping calmly glanced at Thank You. This great Grandmaster Qi cultivator also smiled. The king of Shu, who had been completely aloof, finally looked at Su Fengnian seriously. This could be regarded as the king of Bailiang, whom Chun Jibao had watched coldly for many years, growing up little by little. Xie Guining raised his hand. Thank You immediately poured tea. He smiled and drank a mouthful of tea. This tea seemed to have a taste. Only in this way could the two sides be considered to be on equal footing. Before this, Xie Guining did not regard Su Fengnian as a real opponent at all. Chapter 1439. Xie Guaning said softly, His Highness wants to defend Bailiang and is willing to draw a circle around it. Whether outsiders understand it or not, it's a choice he has no other choice. I don't appreciate this, but since he's the son of great General Su Xiao, I understand. Thus, after this choice, even if Bailiang and Western Shu can't become allies, they won't become mortal enemies. It's pointless to fight over personal feelings. It's meaningless and meaningless. Xie Guaning stared at Su Fengyan and said with a smile, It's just like how the six of us are drinking tea today. The aftertaste is endless and not wine. If a jar of strong wine is opened and finished, we'll be dead drunk. We'll drink to our heart's content, but we'll have a headache the next day. Su Fengyan only asked one question. Has Sir Xie ever thought that millions more people will die in the Central Plains? Xie Guaning fell into silence. After a long while, he asked in return, Then have you ever thought about how to truly inherit Su Zhao's deep will to destroy the foundation of the powerful clans? Su Fengyan laughed coldly. Sir Xie wants to say that from the great Emperor Qin state to the great Feng dynasty and the 9 kingdoms of spring and autumn, there hasn't been a single legitimate emperor of the Central Plains born from humble beginnings? Only with such an emperor can Su Xiao trample over the Central Plains be considered a success. Su Fengyan put down his teacup and said slowly, or according to Sir Xie's words, it's meaningful. Xie Guaning countered. When the Great Qin was hegemonic, Luo Yang was China's land. When the Great Feng dynasty was in power, Qingzhou was the Central Plains. When it came to Liang, Jiangnan was the Central Plains. If one day, millions or even tens of millions of people die, but we can annex all of Beimeng and make the northwest of Bailiang become the Central Plains, what's wrong with that? After we succeed, we'll win hundreds of years of peace under the heavens. The more people who die today, the fewer people who die in the future. Shaking his head, Su Fengyan replied in a deep voice, There are some accounts that can't be settled like this. Xie Guaning didn't get angry because of Su Fengyan's rebuttal. Instead, he said with a relaxed smile, It's said that His Highness never makes a losing deal. It's the same with the 6-pearl bodhisattva in Mount Lantau in the western region, Xianyuan Qingfeng in the Great Snow Plateau in Mount Hui, Ko Jianghuai, the Deputy General of Liangzhou under the pseudonym Su Fengyan, and even more so with a little girl named Lunarong from the Fish Dragon Gang. Before coming to Lingzhou, I made a bet with King of Shu on whether or not you would let Huyin Dawan appear openly, and in the end, I lost. From this, it can be seen that although His Highness's trip to the south looks aggressive, it is actually quite sincere. Su Fengyan smiled and said, Mr. Xie is a schemer, but not a shrewd businessman. You don't understand how I do business with people. Moreover, Mr. Xie is not as good as Huang Xianxia. All these years, you've only learned from others. Huang Xianxia treated the spring and autumn period like a field of crops. Mr. Xie, in the end, you're just a book reader. In the first half of your life, you are far from being a writer. The strategist of the spring and autumn period, Huang Xianxia, my masterly Yishan, Yuan Bunshi, Nailan Yusi, and even Zhang Julu, who isn't strictly a strategist. They are all less restricted than Mr. Xie. After all, it's better to have no books than to believe in books. Of course, when Mr. Xie was born, you couldn't stand the loneliness and try to make up for yourself. Therefore, you looked all over the world and flipped through the pages of the spring and autumn period books. Only then did you come to the Western Shu that hasn't been successful since ancient times. You wanted to start something new. Xie Guaning's expression froze. Xie Guaning felt as if he had fallen into a fog. He didn't understand what this person surnamed Su was talking about. Why would Mr. Xie, who was good at maintaining his composure, get angry? Su Fengyan suddenly turned to look at her and asked with a naughty smile, Aunt Xie, you don't understand, right? Xie Guaning's chest suddenly felt stuffy and short of breath. Tantai Pingjing smiled knowingly. As the person best at observing energy in the world, she only needed a few clues to find the secrets of the heavens. For example, Huang Sanjia's identity as a writer and Xie Guaning's responsibility as an endorser. Huang Sanjia did not change the overall situation, but changed the small details. In the end, he did not die early, but endured until he was 70 years old. This could be called a good death. This was enough to make Xie Guining, who had been diligently endorsing books, feel angry. It was like two examinees in the same year. One had used a loophole in the imperial examinations to easily become a Xianxia, while the other had taken the exam and thought they were of equal talent. How could he not be angry? Now, there was another chance in front of him. So the latter wanted to fight. He didn't just want to beat Huang Sanjia. He wanted to beat Sun Ping, Yuan Bunshi, Li Yishan, Nailan Yusi, and Zhao Chongling. He wanted to win with a clear conscience. Saint stood at 30, did not have doubts at 40, knew destiny at 50, listened to at 60, did as the heart wished at 70, and did not overstep the rules. The reason that Tantai Pingjing had left Liangzhou to Lingzhou was because she and Xie Guining, who was half a peer, were on the opposite side. She thought that Xie Guining's actions were overstepping the rules. As to Xie Guining's capture of the western Shu Serpent Dragon, that was just a subtle sign that the two would part ways. However, she had not expected this day to come so quickly. Xie Guining, who had been exposed, laughed and said in a casual tone, "Wang Yi says Zhao Dun died early. I want to say Zhao Chongling died early." He added, "Li Yishan died late." Su Fingyan said expressionlessly, "As strategists, Yuan Bunshi died late." Xie Guining looked at this young person and laughed. He asked, "Then dare I ask, did I also die late?" Su Fingyan did not speak, but Su Yanbing and Tandai Pingjing stood up at the same time. Xie Guining did not fear this tense atmosphere at all. Instead, she felt the pleasure of wanting to see the world in chaos. As to her own life, she did not care about it. Also, she did not feel that standing next to him, she would be in danger. She had missed this man's spring and autumn. She did not want to miss any of his games to fight for the world. Xie Guining thought that Su Yanbing and the master of the Guanyin sect of the South Sea would fight. She guessed wrong again today. Tantai Pingjing, who was also a woman, looked at her like she was an idiot and asked, "Wait here for death?" Xie Guining was about to speak when she was carried out of the courtyard by the tall woman in white like a chicken. What shocked Xie Guining even more was that the person who left with them and the person who should have stayed in the courtyard for that family, Su Yanbing, who was supposed to be their helper. Could it be that the one surnamed Su wanted to fight one against two? Was he crazy? Tantai Pingjing casually threw Xie Guining aside and looked at the courtyard. She asked, "Is there really no problem?" Su Yanbing said calmly, "The worst situation is for Huyan Daguan to rush back." Tantai Pingjing said emotionally, "Personally, this is the worst situation, but for Bailiang, this is the worst situation." Chapter 1440. Su Yanbing nodded and did not deny it. However, he turned his head and smiled. "However, don't you think that a king of Bailiang like this will vent your anger?" Tantai Pingjing said helplessly, "Disregarding everything else, the impact of this anger on the world is definitely unprecedented." Su Yanbing smiled. "The more it is like this, the more it is worth it for someone like Su Yanbing, who doesn't understand the court and doesn't understand the situation, to choose to stand in Bailiang." Xie smiled coldly and said, "A martial arts grandmaster who has dropped a lot of realms and doesn't live up to his name is showing off his bravado. Does he really think that he is invincible?" Su Yanbing, who had never argued with a woman, scolded for the first time. "What does a woman like you know?" Xie was flabbergasted. She could not argue that she actually knew nothing, right? The trip to Lingzhou this time had indeed left a shadow in the heart of this great beauty who had all the men in Shu bowing down to her. If it were not for the fact that that man was also from Bailiang, she would have cursed him for being a Bailiang barbarian. In the busy market, Huyan Daguan, who had been busy picking out a few exquisite items for his wife and daughter, rolled his eyes. He stopped bargaining with the shopkeeper and left the shop angrily. He did not care whether or not he would attract the shock of the people on the street. He grabbed Tai Dai, Er's arm, and leaped up. In the blink of an eye, the two of them silently landed outside the house. She complained to Su Yanbing and Tantai Pingjing, "What is going on? You can even fight over this?" Xie finally found her place and sneered, "Oh, A capable helper is here. Are there going to be thousands of Lingzhou soldiers rushing over in a hurry? Huyan Daguan could not be bothered with this woman. He looked in the direction of the courtyard and made a sound of surprise. He muttered, "That works too?" Tamadai wanted to say something, but stopped. She probably wanted to ask, but was too embarrassed to. Huyan Daguan raised his head and stared at the sky above the courtyard. He instinctively used the language of the Central Plains to say, "Back then, I gave you 2 words. You were very stupid and could not understand it after so many years. That is why I had you follow Su Fengyan. I hope that you can get close to this grandmaster who is about the same age as you before walking out." Tamadai, who did not understand what Huyan Daguan said, was confused. Huyan Daguan quickly realized his mistake. He switched to the northern Mang accent and said angrily, "Let me teach you a word. Outrageous. If you want to surpass Su Fengyan one day, you have to get rid of him first." Back then, whenever Li Chungang competed with others, Wang Xianji would shamelessly watch from the sidelines. Many people did the same, but not only was it not outrageous, but they also admired Li Chungang more and more, and then stood at the foot of the mountain to look at the scenery at the top for the rest of their lives. Only Wang Xianji gritted her teeth and followed suit, walked to the top, and finally defeated Li Chungang. Oh no, it was a tie back then. Li Chungang was disheartened and gave his position to Wang Xianji. After that, Wang Xianji was even rarer. She didn't stop, and her cultivation rose by leaps and bounds. When one reached the peak, one still had to climb the mountain. Actually, I also understood this principle, but I didn't have the heart to do it. There's a young man called Fuding in Liyang. He has inherited half of Wang Xianji's legacy in Eastern Sea's Martial Emperor City. However, after he lost to Su Fengyan, he has not reached the level of ridiculous yet. But you're not much better. There is nothing you can do about it. Compared to me, your comprehension really makes one feel despair. Hearing Huyan Daguan's long-winded ramblings, Taima smiled. In this world, the only thing that made him feel more intimate than the cheap sword at his waist was this old man's self-praise and belittlement. However, when he saw this man fight for the first time, after receiving 2 strikes from Su Yambing, Tamadai had to admit that Huyan Daguan was the most wasteful person in the world. Huyan Daguan suddenly sighed softly. "Silly boy, I don't expect you to surpass Su Fengyan in this life, but you must follow closely behind him." Tamadai held it in for a long time. Finally, he mustered up the courage to say what was in his heart. My swordsmanship from the very beginning was the only one in the world. I don't need to learn from anyone." Huyan Daguan was stunned. He turned to look at this young man who came from Beimang like him. He patted his shoulder and said, "I underestimated you." "Very good." Huyan Daguan rubbed his chin and said seriously, "No wonder Huyan Daguan, chose you. It turns out that our temperaments are similar. You made me ask myself from time to time when I was in Liyang, was I blinded by lard and blind to give you advice back then? Just based on this, you will definitely be number 1 in the world." Xianxia, who was not far away, was completely stunned. This shameless and attentive fellow was that Northern Mang great-grandmaster who was respectfully referred to as one man, one sect, the martial arts genius who was said to have the potential to replace Tooba Bodhisattva and compete with Wang Xianji for number 1 in the world. Then he felt a little dispirited and powerless. He felt that it was better to return to the land of Shu as soon as possible. The men of the outside world, from the one surnamed Su to Su Yambing to this Huyan Daguan, were all bastards. In the courtyard, Chen Jibao still did not move. Xia Guining sat upright and still. However, this scholar who had reached a high realm did not show any signs of facing a great enemy. Su Fengyan looked at the tea in his cup. With a thought, the water rippled. There was once a Beimang whose sword aura was close to yellow and green. He delivered more than half of his sword, and 16 Buddhas were born. Su Fengyan said sarcastically, "So there is such a scholar." Then, he gently raised his cup and drank the tea in one gulp. Then, Xia Guining, who could be said to have seen the vicissitudes of life, could not help but gasp in amazement when he saw this scene. Countless guests appeared out of nowhere in the courtyard. There was an old man wearing a sheepskin coat who seemed to be standing on top of a mountain and shouting, "Sword, come." There was a middle-aged swordsman riding a donkey and holding a peach branch. His flying sword circled around him. There was a burly old man with snow-white hair, standing with his hands behind his back. An old man with a pair of long eyebrows sat cross-legged and looked like he was eating a sword. There was a short old man with missing front teeth who walked with a box on his back. There were 3 Taoist priests who were different in age but had similar expressions. They stood side by side. There were 3 Wudang Taoists who wore the same Taoist robes. One of them lowered his head and frowned to interpret the lot. One of them looked at the same level and stretched out his finger to break the river. There was an old man with empty hands. His sword arrived as soon as he came. There was someone standing in the middle of the thunder pool where purple gas rose. There was a talisman general in red armor who looked solemn. There was a woman in a green robe who seemed to be leaning on the railing and looking into the distance. There was a stalwart man who held a spear and faced the north. There was an old man in a python robe with his sleeves wrapped in red silk. There was a tall old man who wore a cold saber on his waist. There was a continuous stream of people appearing. The courtyard could be considered spacious. The ground was full of people, and the air was also full of people. In the end, there was even a sickly and haggard scholar sitting on the stone bench beside Xie Guanying. He seemed to be mocking Xie Guanying. These dozens of people spoke together about the free and easy style of the spring and autumn period.